This is recap. If you not want to listen, then forward 4 minutes. In this part, Leon's rise as Asgard's strategist reaches a new level. After the dwarf king Zemo surrenders, Asgard quickly conquers Nidavellir and takes control of the dwarves. Leon refuses to kill Zemo because breaking Odin's promise would damage Asgard's reputation. Instead, he plans to monopolize the dwarves' legendary forging techniques and use them to strengthen Asgard's military power. 30,000 years pass as Asgard gradually becomes the dominant power of the Nine Realms. Leon advises Odin to wait before launching more wars, allowing the dwarves' technology and Asgard's military strength to develop. During this period, Hela grows into a powerful warrior and eventually becomes known as the goddess of death. Asgard later destroys the giants and establishes itself as the hegemon of the Nine Realms. However, tragedy strikes when former Queen Catherine reaches the end of her natural lifespan. Desperate to save his mother, Leon remembers the Time Stone and travels to the prehistoric Earth realm with Groot. There, he discovers Wakanda and encounters its first king, the prehistoric Black Panther. He also meets Agamotto, the ancient sorcerer supreme and guardian of the Time Stone. Leon soon discovers that Earth is being secretly influenced by a celestial. A gigantic celestial-created robot attacks Wakanda, intending to destroy the life forms that interfere with its experiment. Leon, Groot, the first Black Panther, and Agamotto fight together, but the enemy is overwhelmingly powerful. Odin finally arrives, and the three powerful figures, Odin, Leon, and Agamotto, combine the space, reality, and time stones to defeat the robot. They ultimately seal it beneath the ice of the North Pole rather than destroy it, fearing that the true Celestials would come searching for their fallen creation. Agamotto agrees to lend Leon the Time Stone. Leon returns to Asgard and uses its power with Odin to preserve Catherine's life by separating her from the normal flow of time and sealing her palace through space. She survives, although she can no longer leave the palace. After witnessing the celestial threat, Leon realizes Asgard must unite the Nine Realms before greater enemies appear. Odin declares the final war, but 4 realms, Vanaheim, Helheim, Svartalfheim, and Muspelheim, form an alliance against Asgard. Leon creates a strategy to divide their forces and personally leads the attack against powerful Muspelheim. The enormous war culminates in Nidavellir, where Asgard ultimately annihilates the 4-realm alliance's main army. Asgard becomes virtually unrivaled, setting the stage for the final unification of the 9 realms. Now start part 3.
Number 37. Attack. Tony, dinner is ready. Just as Leon and little Tony were chatting happily, a woman in a long blue dress walked out of the villa. Mrs. Stark. Seeing the beautiful young woman, Leon quickly put little Tony down from his arms. Howard's wife was a very beautiful woman. Time had not left many marks on her face. Instead, it had given her a kind of intellectual beauty, mature and steady, beautiful and graceful. Little Tony's mother also looked toward Leon. With a smile on her face, she said, "Mr. Leon." Through their interactions over the past few days, the Stark family of 3 had a fairly good impression of Leon. Howard had praised Leon several times, calling him humble, gentle, and courteous. Leon chuckled and casually exchanged a polite greeting. "Is Mr. Howard at home?" On ordinary days, little Tony's father was an extremely busy man. Stark Industries, in his hands, was one of the most profitable companies in the country. Howard himself was also a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. From time to time, he had to handle S.H.I.E.L.D. matters as well. On normal days, the time he spent with his wife and child could be said to be pitifully little. Little Tony's birthday is in the next few days. Little Tony's mother raised the corners of her mouth and replied, "So he may come back tomorrow." "Mr. Leon, why don't you come over tomorrow night and have some cake?" "Cake?" Little Tony clapped his small hands excitedly. "Mr. Leon, you have to come eat cake tomorrow." "All right." Leon had not expected that a casual sentence from him would actually lead to something like this. However, Leon was still very willing to attend a gathering that could bring him closer to the Stark family. "Good. Don't be late when the time comes. Tony's mother smiled happily. She said nothing more and pulled the little guy's hand as they walked back into the villa. After seeing the little guy's mother enter the villa, Leon put away the smile on his face. Expressionless, he glanced toward the southwest. Damn it. In an abandoned factory to the southwest, a man was holding binoculars and spying. At that moment, Leon happened to look in this direction as well. After meeting Leon's gaze through the binoculars, the man froze, then cursed, "Boss, I feel like Howard's neighbor beside him seems to have discovered me." Bonk! Bonk! Hearing the man's words, a bespectacled man behind him walked over and knocked him hard on the head twice without hesitation. This place is at least 3 kilometers away from Howard's home. How could he possibly have discovered us? Don't make a fuss over nothing. But... The man's head throbbed faintly, but remembering that person's gaze just now, he still insisted, "I feel like he really did discover us. Is it really that strange?" The bespectacled man frowned, seeming a little suspicious. He pushed his subordinate aside, then picked up the binoculars and looked into the distance as well. However, this time, there was no one in the binoculars at all. Seeing this, the bespectacled man finally could not hold back. He put down the binoculars in his hand and said rudely to his subordinate, "Where's anyone? Rolf, you've been acting suspicious and paranoid lately." "Really?" The man called Rolf by the bespectacled man also scratched his head in confusion. "Are you looking for me?" At that moment, a voice sounded beside the bespectacled man. The two of them could not help shivering. They felt cold all over, and their bodies became strangely stiff. "What the hell?" The bespectacled man quickly looked to the side, while his right hand instinctively reached for the handgun at his waist. "Don't move." No matter how fast the bespectacled man was, he was still immortal. How could he compare to Leon? Seeing his movement, Leon reacted with sharp eyes and quick hands, restraining the bespectacled man with one hand while swiftly snatching the handgun from his arms. "You too." Leon held the handgun and pointed it at the man named Rolf. Seeing this, Rolf immediately gave up resisting. Very tactfully, he raised both hands. "Very good." Leon looked at Rolf with appreciation. Immediately after, Leon said to the bespectacled man, "Who are you? Why are you monitoring Howard and his family?" The bespectacled man said coldly, "I will absolutely never talk. Our organization." Bang! A dull sound rang out. Leon blew the smoke from the handgun, his face somewhat displeased. "If you won't talk, then don't waste words. You're only wasting everyone's time." A drop of scarlet blood flowed from the bespectacled man's temple. A few seconds later, blood gushed out. The bespectacled man's eyes were wide open, and even in death, his face still carried an expression of disbelief. Boom! The bespectacled man's corpse instantly collapsed to the ground, blood spreading everywhere across the floor. "You talk." Leon shifted his gaze onto Rolf. He raised the gun as a signal. "You can also refuse to talk, but your ending will be the same as his." "I'll talk. I'll talk." After personally witnessing his leader die, how could Rolf still dare refuse? He said excitedly, "I serve Hydra. Right now, I've been ordered to monitor Howard Stark. According to our intelligence, he will return home tomorrow to celebrate his son's birthday. At that time, we only need to send out the information." Leon interrupted Rolf. "Looks like my guess was right. You really are Hydra's people. Are you planning to kill Howard now?" Although S.H.I.E.L.D. had still not changed its name yet, its open and hidden struggles with Hydra had already continued for many years. Howard had always been one of the core figures of S.H.I.E.L.D. To Hydra, they had probably never given up on eliminating Howard. "No, no." Rolf shook his head repeatedly. The people in the organization said that now is not the time to kill Howard. "We want to ask him about the whereabouts of a treasure." "A treasure?" Leon seemed to think of something. He interrupted Rolf again. "The Space Stone? You're looking for the Tesseract? So you already know everything, huh? Then why the hell are you asking me?" My boss really died for nothing. Rolf looked at Leon with resentment. A strange feeling rose in his heart. In all his life, he had never seen this kind of interrogation before. Leon ignored Rolf's strange gaze and continued asking, "Just the two of you are going to kill Howard?" "No." Rolf shook his head. "We're intelligence personnel. The ones who'll take action are another group." "Oh." Leon slowly said, "I thought the two of you didn't look like combat personnel. With your skills, you probably wouldn't even be Howard's match." "Damn it, do you even know how to talk to people?" Rolf's face darkened. For a moment, he did not know what to say. "All right." Leon secretly took a breath. "Tell your organization there are no obstacles. They can continue the operation." "You." Hearing Leon's words, Rolf's expression became somewhat unnatural. He had never expected that this person would actually want the operation to continue. "Why are you wasting words?" Leon looked at Rolf with an unfriendly expression. "If you don't listen, you'll end up like your boss." All right. Rolf looked at his boss's corpse, his face pale. He no longer dared say another word. Seeing that Rolf no longer spoke, Leon began thinking about his next move. Tens of thousands of years ago, in order to prevent ambitious people in the Nine Realms from using the Infinity Stones to rebel against Asgard's rule, Leon had personally stepped forward and requested that the Dwarf King forge the Space Stone into the Tesseract. Only in this way would the magical energy leaking from the Space Stone remain undetected by outsiders. In the end, Leon had personally thrown the Tesseract toward the earthly realm. The reason he chose the earthly realm was, on one hand, because the earthly realm was poor and weak, and the forces of the Nine Realms rarely set foot here. On the other hand, it was because he needed to lay out his plans in the earthly realm. According to the current timeline, the Tesseract was indeed within S.H.I.E.L.D. As one of the many founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., Howard must naturally know the Tesseract's whereabouts. The next evening, the Stark home was brightly lit. Leon, Groot, and the Howard couple looked at little Tony with faces full of affection. Little Tony wore a red paper hat, and in front of him was a heart-shaped cake. Howard reached out and scratched the little guy's nose, then teased, "Tony, hurry up and make a wish." "I hope." Hearing his father's words, little Tony clasped his hands together and hurriedly closed his eyes. He murmured, "I hope Father and Mother will stay with me forever." "Ha ha ha." Little Tony's mother laughed and said, "If you say your wish out loud, it won't come true." Everyone laughed one after another. Only Leon's expression changed slightly. At this moment, it felt as if a huge stone had blocked his heart, leaving him deeply melancholy. "Mr. Howard." Leon felt that he needed to do something. He said to Howard with a serious expression, "I hope you and your wife will never ride in the same car again." "Why?" Howard looked at Leon in confusion. "Mr. Leon, why would you say something like that?" Leon's tone grew heavier. "I can't give you an explanation for this. I only hope you promise me that from today onward, you and your wife must never ride in the same car again." Tonight, Hydra would attack Howard's villa. However, this was only a trick Leon wanted to use to draw closer to Howard. Howard would not suffer any real harm because of it. The true cause of Howard's death would be a car accident several years later. It was also that car accident that directly led to the deaths of Howard and his wife. It was called a car accident, but Leon knew that the planner behind it was most likely Hydra, and the person who carried it out was even Captain America's good friend, the Winter Soldier. Leon could not protect the Stark family forever, but he hoped that during that future car accident, at least one of the Howard couple could be preserved. 3, 2, 1. Detonate. Boom. An explosion rang out. The Stark family villa instantly became a mess, and some pieces of furniture fell to the ground in disorder. Detonation successful. Prepare to breach. The Stark family of 3 had all fallen to the floor, while Leon and Groot also pretended to lie down beside Howard. Number 38. Divine Wrath. After the sound of the explosion faded, Howard gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand up. But the moment he rose, a wave of dizziness surged into his head. Howard nearly collapsed back to the floor. Leaning against the corner of the wall, he struggled to support himself, then hurriedly looked around. Tony! Tony! Seeing the little guy lying on the floor, Howard's expression changed. He quickly ran toward Tony. Little Tony was still wearing the paper hat from his birthday. When Howard saw that, his heart clenched at once. Dad! Little Tony rubbed his eyes, then tried to stand up. Entry successful. But at that moment, a team of men wearing black hoods and carrying submachine guns suddenly entered through the doorway. Get down! Howard quickly pulled his son to the floor. At the same time, he leapt up, and the fist in his hand slammed heavily into a man's abdomen. Ah! After suffering Howard's heavy blow, the man staggered several meters backward. Rat-tat-tat. Rat-tat-tat-tat. Seeing Howard injure their teammate, the others raised their guns and fired at him. Howard seemed to have already anticipated this. He lowered his body and used the fallen furniture on the floor to avoid the submachine gun bullets. Bang! Howard pulled out his own handgun from the floor. With only 5 or 6 bullets, he dealt with the enemies who had rushed inside. Howard truly had good skills. Seeing Howard take down one man in black with each shot, Leon exclaimed inwardly. Although Howard's abilities were not comparable to a superhero's, decades ago, he had once fought the Red Skull alongside Captain America. Because of that, his strength was greater than that of an ordinary person. Team 1 wiped out. Team 2, prepare. At that moment, another voice came from outside the house. Hearing those words, Howard's expression changed. This time, the enemy had clearly come prepared. If he were alone, it would be fine, he would naturally have a way to escape. But now, his wife and child were both here. How could he possibly be a match for these well-trained men in black by himself? No. For some reason, Howard suddenly began to feel dizzy. A powerful wave of sleepiness surged into his mind, and Howard cried out in his heart, the smoke from earlier was poisonous. Boom! The 3 members of the Howard family collapsed to the ground again. But this time, none of them stood back up. Groot, kill them all. Don't leave any alive. Seeing Howard's entire family fall to the floor, Leon knew it was time for him to act. If the Howard family were harmed this time, the loss would outweigh the gain. Yes. Groot blew out a breath, and a gentle breeze immediately rose inside the house. In an instant, all the poison gas in the room was purified. Groot belonged to the Flora Colossus race, which could also be considered a branch of the World Tree lineage. Against this poisonous gas, plants had a natural purification ability. At the same time, another team of men in black broke into Howard's villa. Groot stood up directly. His 2 arms looked as if they were about to explode, and his flesh-like skin turned the color of dead wood. God, what the hell is that? Seeing Groot's arms completely transform into constantly extending branches, the men in black widened their eyes, looking as if they had seen a ghost. Splurt! Splurt! Groot gave the men in black no time to marvel. Before his 2 thick arms, the bodies of these men in black were like thin sheets of paper. Ah! The men in black screamed. Team 2! Team 2! What's going on? Hearing the miserable screams of the men in black inside the house, the Hydra soldiers outside shouted, "What exactly is happening?" How could the men in black inside hear their companions' calls? Groot's arms directly pierced through their hearts, not giving them even the slightest chance to speak. As a powerhouse from myth, how could these mortals possibly be Groot's opponents? Even if they held submachine guns, their struggle was nothing but futile. Go! Leon stood up and stretched his limbs. Clean up the ones outside too. All right. Groot had already returned to his true form. His originally handsome face had now become expressionless. But after hearing Leon's words, a trace of excitement appeared in Groot's eyes. After the unification of the 9 realms, the number of times Groot had the chance to act could be counted on one hand. After arriving in the earthly realm, he had even fewer chances to fight anyone. Although Groot was not some battle maniac, this peaceful life in the earthly realm had made him quite uncomfortable. Crash! Groot did not take the ordinary path. He leapt up and rushed straight out through the window. Ah! Ah! Screams rang out continuously outside, but Leon ignored them. He lightly walked to little Tony's side. Seeing that the little guy was safe and sound, Leon finally let out a breath of relief. Iron Man would be an important figure in the future Marvel main storyline. Leon did not want anything unexpected to happen to the little guy during this farce. It's done. Before long, Groot walked back into the house covered in blood. He said to Leon, "More than 50 people. Not a single one left alive." Leon had just opened his mouth to say something, but Groot continued, "The bodies have already been destroyed, and all traces erased. With the current development level of the earthly realm, they definitely won't be able to detect anything." Very good. Hearing Groot's words, Leon finally nodded in satisfaction. Let's go. Take them to the vampire. Leon held little Tony and Howard, while Groot carried Howard's wife. Together, the two of them walked outside. Where am I? The moment Howard opened his eyes, he saw his wife and child looking at him with worried expressions. Enduring the discomfort in his body, Howard sat up. He looked around and saw that the surroundings were dim and lightless, with a faint chill in the air. Howard asked again, "Where are we? Did those men in black capture us?" "No." Groot walked out from the darkness. At this moment, he had already returned to his human appearance. "Mr. Howard, you are very safe here. Those men in black from earlier have all been killed by us. Mr. Loot." Loot, this was Groot's alias in the earthly realm. Seeing Groot walking toward him, Howard's brows furrowed tightly. "You, just who exactly are you?" Those men in black from earlier had all been agile, well-trained soldiers. Killing them all was easier said than done. At this moment, Howard could not help developing some suspicion toward this Mr. Loot's identity. Perhaps they had deliberately approached him. Howard quietly stood in front and slowly pulled his wife and child behind him. Naturally, this scene could not escape Groot's eyes. He smiled slightly. "Mr. Howard, we have no malicious intent. I am only an ordinary person. We were able to kill those people only because we had more people on our side. Mr. Stark." At some point, Dracula had also walked to Groot's side. He respectfully said to Howard, "We meet again. Mr. Duh." Seeing Dracula's arrival, Howard suddenly understood, as if everything had become clear. Dracula, the underground king of this city, known as the Godfather. Many gangs secretly obeyed his orders. Howard was a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., and a few years ago, he had not wanted to deal with someone who stood on the gray edge of the world. But he had never expected that the people who saved him this time would actually be from the underworld. Right? Howard seemed to remember something. He asked Groot, "Where's Mr. Leon? He has something to deal with." Groot narrowed his eyes, and a somewhat mysterious expression appeared on his face. "Is that the place?" Night covered the sky. Hundreds of meters in the air, Leon held Rolf with one hand while pointing with the other at a brightly lit, low-rise building on the ground. It was already past midnight. Most of the buildings on the ground had turned off their lights, yet that building below still maintained a dazzling brightness. Yes. Looking at the buildings below, tiny as ants, how could Rolf dare resist? He curled up like a chick, swallowed, and said in a trembling voice, "On the surface, that building is just a transportation company. In truth, it's one of Hydra's secret bases. The transportation company is only a cover." After experiencing Leon's methods, Rolf no longer dared show even the slightest loyalty to Hydra. "Oh God!" Rolf tapped his foot downward, but still could not touch the ground. He shouted, "Big brother, from now on, I don't believe in God anymore. Hydra and all that can go to hell. I believe in you, big brother. From now on, I believe in you." "Noisy." Leon scolded, "Shut up. If you say another word, I'll throw you down." All right. Rolf quickly covered his mouth with both hands. Let's go. Leon stretched lazily. His aura became vast and majestic, carrying a pressure like 10,000 tons as he flew toward the brightly lit building on the ground. Crack! Crack! The moment Leon's body approached the brightly lit building below, the powerful aura around him caused every pane of glass inside the building to shatter into pieces. Everyone from Hydra inside the building looked outside at the same time. Leon stood expressionlessly in the sky, like a deity returning from the heavens. What the hell? Before long, everyone saw Leon hovering in midair. Divine punishment. Leon gently opened his mouth and said, "Erase everyone here." Rumble. Dark clouds covered the sky. A bolt of lightning several zhang wide struck down into the building. Why isn't the telephone working? Where's the signal? Where's the signal? Inside the building, Hydra's members shouted one after another. Boom! Immediately after, a massive fire dragon made entirely of flames flew into the building. Number 39. Summoning. Red light shone across Leon's face. His expression held neither joy nor sorrow, appearing completely calm. Ah! Ah! Screams rang out endlessly from within the building. Those sounds were like soul-reaping ghosts, especially miserable in Goof's ears. After all, some of the people inside were his colleagues. They had trained together before, and some had even fought side by side with him. But now, those people were wailing in the flames. Goof's nose twitched, and the scent of charred flesh drifted into his nostrils. Ugh! Goof's expression changed, and he bent over, vomiting. Useless. Seeing this, Leon rolled his eyes at Goof. After his body landed on the ground, he flicked his right hand and casually threw Goof aside. The towering flames were like a venomous snake, rapidly crawling into every corner of the building. Leon's eyes were filled with a scarlet glow. Staring at the endless flames, he muttered to himself, "This is a fire accident caused by lightning. That way, even if S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra investigate this at the same time, they won't be able to trace it back to me." No. As if Leon had remembered something, he quickly looked to the side. There's still one loophole. Goof, Hydra's fish that had slipped through the net. The only survivor of this base. Big bro. Goof seemed to see the killing intent in Leon's eyes. He quickly dropped to his knees and said, "Don't kill me. I'm just someone in charge of gathering intelligence. Maybe, you'll be able to use me in the future." As Goof spoke, he hesitated inwardly for a moment, because after thinking for a long time, he still could not figure out what he could possibly do for this god before him. Use you? Leon immediately stopped in his tracks, a faint trace of struggle appearing on his face. Although Hydra's people were not good people, they played an enormous role in pushing forward the future main storyline of Marvel. In the early timeline, the Winter Soldier alone stirred up the entire Avengers. Fine. Leon thought for half a minute before finally replying, "I'll make an exception and take you in as my lackey. Since you're only a mortal, you won't be able to withstand my restraints." Leon had originally wanted to use the same method he had used to bind Dracula and repeat the trick on Goof, but considering that Goof was only an ordinary person, he had no choice but to give up on that idea. Leon said leisurely, "In the future, you may betray me. But I hope that when you have the thought of betraying me, you'll think carefully about whether following me gives you a better future, or following Hydra does." Having said this much, Leon did not say anything more. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra were indispensable parts of the Marvel Universe. Leon did not fear their strength, but he also did not dare ignore them. Goof could be left behind as a chess piece. Teleportation, flight, lightning, fire dragons. Even God was nothing more than this, right? Hearing Leon's words, Goof's thoughts spun rapidly. In the blink of an eye, he weighed the pros and cons and shouted, "Big bro, from now on, I'm with you." God? Damn it, could God beat this monster? Hydra? What a joke. If I weren't broke, who the hell would join Hydra? Goof immediately forgot every oath he had sworn when he joined Hydra. A wise decision. However, Leon's tone shifted, and the aura around him instantly became sharp and cold. I'm not taking you in for free. An ordinary Hydra agent is of no use to me. I hope you can enter Hydra's higher ranks. Goof was only an ordinary agent, the lowest existence in Hydra. To be honest, the current him was of no use to Leon at all. Yeah. Goof felt somewhat dejected. Indeed, he seemed to be completely useless right now. So, Leon said softly, I now have several important pieces of intelligence to share with you. The Cosmic Cube should currently be in a secret base in New Jersey. Captain America actually isn't dead. He's still sleeping somewhere. The underworld godfather of this city is a vampire who has already lived for several hundred years. See which of these pieces of information is useful to you. According to the timeline, the Cosmic Cube should currently be in New Jersey, and Leon could also easily find the place where Captain America was sleeping. As for Dracula, Leon did not even consider him and directly sold out that black bat. Wait. Goof reached out to stop Leon, because these pieces of news were far too unbelievable. He needed to properly digest them. Captain America? Didn't he die decades ago? And vampires? Could someone really live for hundreds of years? Maybe, there really were people who could. Goof looked at Leon, becoming more and more convinced that he had encountered God. Goof's lips moved, and he had already made his decision. I choose the information about the Cosmic Cube. Leon nodded in satisfaction. Very good. In the future, you will be proud of the decision you made today. May you be immune to all poisons. Leon waved his hand at Goof, and a beam of white light poured into Goof's body. Seeing this, Leon nodded in satisfaction. Consider this a little benefit for you. Work hard. As long as I'm happy, what does it matter if I even grant you a few more decades of life? Leon was not very familiar with certain divine curses and spells, but making a mortal like Goof stay away from headaches and fevers was still something he could do. After revealing the information about the Cosmic Cube to Goof, Leon returned to Dracula's castle. However, by the time he came back, the Stark family had already left. Leon did not say anything more about it. After all, the goal this time had already been achieved. Howard and little Tony would remember that he had saved the Stark family. In the future, Iron Man could also be considered someone who had a bit of a life and death bond with him. In the deepest part of the ancient castle, Leon sat with his legs crossed, smoking an expensive cigar. Smoke curled from his mouth, and he looked extremely relaxed. Groot came before Leon and asked, "What do we do next?" "Nothing." Leon blew out a smoke ring and said indifferently, "Slack off, flirt with girls, drink a little, and wait for Stark to grow up." Right now, the closest Marvel World timeline to Leon should be the Captain Marvel one. However, Captain Marvel's matters were far too complicated, and Leon did not want to interfere. After all, it involved forces outside the universe. Leon did not want to sink too deeply into it. He might as well let Wonder Woman handle the Skrull trouble herself. It was rare for him to rest for a few days. Leon wanted to give himself a vacation. Boom! A brilliant white light fell outside the ancient castle. Groot and Leon exchanged a glance, then both of them quickly ran outside. The Bifrost. It was the Bifrost. Leon and Groot had lived in Asgard for so long that they understood the Bifrost's purpose better than anyone. Someone had come to Earth through the Bifrost. Had something happened in Asgard? Leon thought for a long time, but he still could not think of any enemy in the 9 realms capable of threatening Asgard at this point. Malekith, leader of the Dark Elves, had been defeated many times by Odin and himself. He had long since been scared out of his wits. The frost giant Laufey only hid in the shadows and could not become a major threat. Even if Surtur escaped his seal, he was still no match for Odin. Looking across the current 9 realms, Leon saw nothing but petty thieves and lowlifes. "Your Highness, Mr. Groot?" Outside the castle stood 2 soldiers wearing bright golden armor and holding long spears. Seeing the strange outfits Leon and Groot were wearing, the 2 soldiers almost failed to recognize them. Leon said impatiently, "If you have something to say, say it quickly." Through the style of these two soldiers' armor, Leon had already recognized which unit they belonged to. These two belonged to the Royal Guard. Although this unit only had a few thousand members, every single one of them was a warrior capable of facing 10,000 men. This unit's mission was to protect the safety of Asgard's royal family. In all of Asgard, only two people could mobilize them, the former King Bor and Odin. Yes. One of the soldiers quickly said, "We have come by order of King Bor to invite your highness to Asgard." "Father?" Leon frowned. Did he say what it was about? He had only been out for a few days. Could Asgard really not function without him? Leon felt very dissatisfied. The soldiers had no intention of hiding anything. They said in unison, "It seems to be related to Queen Kathleen." "Mother?" Hearing their words, Leon said anxiously, "Did something happen to Mother?" Back then, his mother's lifespan had been nearing its end, and Leon had borrowed the Time Stone to extend her life. However, the Time Stone could not guarantee Kathleen's immortality. Now that tens of thousands of years had passed, the Time Stone's effect had grown weaker and weaker. Leon had thought before that this day would come, but he had not expected it to arrive so quickly. "We don't know." The two soldiers shook their heads. "King Bor only ordered us to invite you back as quickly as possible." Hearing this, Leon no longer dared refuse. He went directly in front of the two soldiers, then shouted at the sky, "Heimdall, hurry! Open the Bifrost! I need to go back." The light of the Bifrost swept over the four of them. By the time the light faded, Leon and the others had vanished. After returning to Asgard, Leon had no time to greet the thick-browed, big-eyed fellow. He flew straight toward Kathleen's palace. "Mother!" Leon shouted loudly without caring about his image. "Mother, are you all right? Can't you be a little more composed, child?" The moment Leon entered Kathleen's bedchamber, he heard his mother scolding him. "You're still acting like a child." Leon froze and discovered that there were several other people in his mother's bedchamber, Odin, his father, and a black-haired woman. What Leon found strange was that this black-haired woman was actually seated beside his mother. One had to know that even his elder brother was standing stiffly at his mother's side, not daring to breathe too loudly. Leon looked completely confused, but he still adjusted his clothes and bowed. "Royal brother, father." "Your Majesty, then I shall take my leave first." After the black-haired woman saw Leon arrive, she seemed especially uneasy. After speaking to Kathleen, she lowered her head and walked outside. During that time, Leon did not even have the chance to see the black-haired woman's appearance clearly. After the woman left, only 4 people remained in the bedchamber. This was precisely Leon's family of 4. At this moment, Odin had returned to the appearance of a middle-aged man. In front of his parents, he did not need to maintain the dignified image of an old king. Odin walked over to Leon with a smile on his face. "Did you have fun on your trip to Earth?" Number 40. Marriage. During the last battle against the Four-Realm Alliance, Odin's eye had been injured by the fire giant Surtur, so even now, Odin still wore a golden eye patch. Perhaps because he had ruled the 9 realms for many years, Odin now looked full of majesty. There was no need for him to deliberately reveal it. His body already carried an aura of supremacy. Wells rubbed his nose and said somewhat awkwardly, "Not bad, not bad." Of course, Wells would not tell him about S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. His elder brother ruled the 9 realms, and in his eyes, Wells's experiences from the past few days were nothing more than a few farces. "You little bastard." Catherine's tone rose as she pretended to be angry. "Do you know why I called you back this time?" Wells had followed his mother since childhood. He knew every expression on his mother's face, and at this moment, he also knew that his mother was deliberately picking a fight. However, he did not care much. Wells said indifferently, "How would I know what madness you old lady are having?" In Asgard, only Wells dared speak to Catherine like this. Even Odin would not dare offend his mother so directly. "You little turtle bastard." Catherine said with an angry face, "You're not young anymore. Every day, you only know how to fool around, and you don't consider your own affairs at all." It has been tens of thousands of years, and I still have to be the one, this old undying woman, to arrange things for you. Aren't you ashamed? You. Hearing his mother's words, Wells's heart instantly panicked, but on the surface, he remained calm. He said to his mother, I think you've gone crazy from having too much free time. How boring. After saying this, Wells planned to walk outside. No matter how foolish Wells was, he understood his mother's meaning at this point. Queen Catherine had never encountered any accident at all. The reason the old lady had summoned him back from the earthly realm this time was most likely because she wanted to see her youngest son start a family and establish himself. Hey! Seeing that Wells was about to leave, Odin grabbed him and whispered, Let mother finish. All right. Since Odin had stopped him, Wells finally halted his steps toward the outside. That's more like it. Catherine smiled slyly at her youngest son, as if her scheme had succeeded. Hannah is an extremely intelligent woman. If she can become your wife, then I can close my eyes in peace. Hey! This matter seemed as if it had already been hammered into place, becoming an irreversible fact. Wells hurriedly said, I am the dignified Prince of Asgard, someone who once commanded thousands upon thousands of troops. You're deciding it just like this? Isn't that a little too careless? And also, who exactly is this Hannah? I didn't even see her face just now. What if she's ugly? Wouldn't I be losing out? Hearing his youngest son's words, Bor, who was standing nearby, finally could not hold back. He glared at Wells. Hannah is the woman who was sitting beside your mother just now. She comes from the elven race. If Asgard had not unified the 9 realms, perhaps this woman would have become the first female Grand Elder of the elves, or even their future queen. The elven race? How could she be from the elven race? Wells's face was filled with deep confusion. He had once been sent as an envoy to Alfheim, the realm of the elves, so he also understood the elven race somewhat. Every elf was either a beautiful woman or a handsome man, but they all had blonde hair, blue eyes, and slightly pointed ears. As for the woman who had brushed past him just now, although Wells had not seen her face clearly, he remembered her head of glossy black hair very clearly. Black hair. That was not the skin color the elven race should have. Bor continued, this woman's birth is very unusual. The elven race reproduces normally, but this Hannah, I heard, walked out from the sacred temple of the elves. After that, she absorbed the essence of the tree of life from childhood. She was born from heaven and earth, a true spirit race of heaven and earth. Born from heaven and earth? What kind of nonsense is Senior Tree of Life doing now? Wells had a deep memory of that unreliable tree of life. So many years had passed. He wondered whether the old man had restored the forest's time to normal. If not, that would truly be too tragic, my ass. Whenever Wells thought of that giant tree old man, he could not help wanting to laugh. You two should talk first. Catherine advised, whether it is appearance or personality, I am very satisfied with Hannah. If possible, I hope she can become my youngest daughter-in-law. Catherine looked at Wells with a face full of expectation. For a moment, Wells did not know what to say. Their family of 4 was now all here. Although Odin had not said anything, since his mother and father had already spoken, he probably would not say anything either. All right. Wells sighed. His whole person looked like a defeated rooster as he lowered his head and said, I'll take a look first. Good. Catherine nodded with great joy. Hannah is in the palace right now. You two should get to know each other first. Later, you can discuss your lifelong matters. Fine. Wells turned and left his mother's bedchamber. He wanted to see exactly what virtues and abilities this Hannah possessed to make his mother so fond of her. After Wells left the palace, Catherine put away the smile on her face. Wells is my final attachment. Once his matter is settled, it will be time for me to leave this world. It has been tens of thousands of years. I want to go outside and walk around. This magnificent palace, in my eyes, is nothing more than a cage. Hearing his mother's words, Odin's face revealed sadness for the first time. Although this palace had the magic of the Time Stone and the Space Stone, tens of thousands of years had already passed. Its effects were becoming worse and worse. More importantly, his mother no longer wanted to stay here. Through the endless years, she had lived inside this palace. In essence, she was actually nothing more than a prisoner. Ahem. When Wells returned to the palace, he found Hannah admiring the landscape paintings in the room. Her back was turned to Wells, and her glossy black hair was especially eye-catching. Wells lightly coughed. Hannah's body stiffened, and she slowly turned around. A clear, fair, and delicate face appeared before Wells's eyes. At the corner of her small mouth was a playful smile. Moonlight shone into her bright eyes, making them look like two stars. Although her green eyes were set in a restrained face, they were restless, clever, and full of wit, completely at odds with her carefully adorned appearance. Wells looked Hannah over meticulously. In his heart, he finally understood why his mother liked her so much. This woman named Hannah wore a bright green brocade dress, its color extremely vivid. But under the radiance of her beauty, even the most brilliant brocade seemed dull and colorless. Forget Asgard, even across the entire 9 realms, such a beauty was extremely rare. Your Highness. Hannah bowed to Wells. Seeing Wells staring at her without saying a word, Hannah's face flushed red. Not daring to meet his eyes, she quickly lowered her head again. Wells seemed to understand something. After all, he was someone who had seen great storms. He immediately restored his usual composure. What do you think of these paintings? The people below know I like paying attention to the scenery of the 9 realms, so they sent all these paintings up. During the conquest of the 9 realms, there had been a period when Wells enjoyed browsing strange tales, local customs, and folk traditions from across the 9 realms. The generals under him thought this was his personal interest. In order to please Wells, they sent him these gifts. In truth, Wells had been observing the preferences of the people of the 9 realms to prepare for future occupation work. However, Wells did not reject the goodwill of those generals. He accepted them all at once. Hannah raised her head and said with a smile, "Your Highness handles countless affairs every day. I didn't expect you to still possess such refined leisure." Hannah's words and behavior were dignified and graceful. Between every frown and smile, she revealed an indescribable charm. At this moment, she was like a peony just about to bloom, beautiful without being seductive, radiant without being vulgar, charming in every way, and incomparable. Hannah's smile made Wells feel as if he were bathed in a spring breeze. It had been a very long time since he had spoken to someone like this. In the 9 realms, aside from a few family members like Odin, most of the people Wells came into contact with flattered him endlessly, afraid that a single wrong word would anger him. Immediately after, Wells seemed to remember something and asked, "Are you truly a spirit race born from heaven and earth?" Feeling that speaking this way was somewhat impolite, Wells immediately explained, "I don't mean anything else. I've also dealt with the Tree of Life before." In Wells's understanding, Hannah should be a life form nurtured by the Tree of Life. It was very likely that she was also a branch of the plant race. It is not exactly as the outside rumors say. Hannah gave a soft laugh and said, "I was worshipped and nurtured by the elven race, a being different from the elves. However, at that time, I still had no consciousness. In the end, it was Grandfather Tree of Life who used the essence of the Tree of Life to give me life." As if feeling that her words were a little convoluted, Hannah blinked and said slowly, "You can understand me as a combination of the Tree of Life and the elven race." "Oh." Wells nodded, half understanding. No wonder when he had left the elven realm before, the Grand Elder had been so happy after learning that the Tree of Life had consciousness. So he had already thought of this long ago. After the conversation ended, the two of them fell silent again. Even though Wells had experienced many grand scenes, at this moment, he did not know what he should say. The 3rd generation of the royal family, Hela. "What do you think of me?" The two broke the silence at the same time. But after hearing the other person speak as well, they both froze. In the end, Wells smiled awkwardly. You first, you first. Number 41. Escape. His Highness asked me just now what impression I had of you. Hannah's eyes were like gemstones, fluttering with a captivating light. Hearing Wells's words, Hannah said softly, "In my heart, I'm afraid there is no one in all the 9 realms who can compare to your Highness. If your Highness had not been secretly planning and strategizing from behind the scenes, I fear the 9 realms would not be as peaceful as they are now." Hannah's opinion of Wells was extremely high. As she spoke, her face was filled with worship, her eyes practically sparkling. Not at all, not at all. Wells did not dare take advantage of her praise and climb higher. He quickly said humbly, "Those are merely the praises of outsiders. The unification of the 9 realms was the tide of history. I simply went along with the flow. The unification of the 9 realms had been caused by many complicated factors." Wells did not dare claim all the credit for himself. As the saying went, behind one general's success lie 10,000 bones. Behind this glorious achievement, there were actually endless corpses. Your Highness is too modest. Hannah smiled sweetly. Over the years, I have been handling the trivial affairs of the elven race. The elves are a peace-loving race. They all say that the 9 realms can enjoy such peace today because of your Highness's achievements. To be able to marry your Highness is the dream of every woman in the 9 realms. By the time she finished the last sentence, Hannah's voice had already become so soft it was almost inaudible. Her face was flushed, and she looked shy and delicate. After Asgard descended upon the world with an absolutely forceful stance, the 9 realms grew increasingly peaceful day by day. However, at this moment, one piece of news swept across the 9 realms like a storm. The news that Asgard's prince, the younger brother of Odin, supreme ruler of the 9 realms, His Highness Wells, was about to marry spread to every corner of the 9 realms. After tens of thousands of years of silence, Asgard instantly became lively once more. Asgard's royal family was the ruler of the 9 realms. People paid more attention to them than to any strange rumor or wonder. Now that there was a rare chance to witness a joyous occasion for the royal family, everyone eagerly looked forward to the arrival of that day. However, as the central figure of this storm, Wells acted as if nothing had happened. He was currently chatting idly with his elder brother Odin, speaking one sentence and then another. "Where are my 2 precious nephews?" Wells said to Odin, "Where are Thor and Loki?" Thor had displayed extraordinary talent since childhood. It was said that a month before his birth, Asgard had been filled with thunder and lightning, dark clouds covering the sky. If Odin had not acted in time, many of Asgard's buildings might have disappeared. On the day Thor was born, he naturally possessed the power of thunder and lightning. This was an extremely rare talent. In the history of the royal family, this was a heaven-defying gift. Even Bor, who had already retired, placed great importance on this eldest grandson of his and personally named him Thor. When Thor was born, Wells had still been in slumber, so he had not had the chance to see this eldest nephew of his. When he finally ended his slumber, the god of thunder was off fighting abroad. Afterward, Wells had been in a hurry to make arrangements on Earth, so the 2 of them missed each other once again. Thor was already over 1,000 years old, yet because of these repeated coincidences, Wells had never once seen his elder brother's son. Them. Thinking of that pair of troublesome brothers, Odin also smiled with indulgence. Some time ago, Malekith stirred up some trouble. By my order, they went to suppress it. They probably won't be able to return for now. But if you get married, they definitely won't miss it. Although Asgard had now unified the 9 realms, there were still some resisting forces in certain regions, and among them, Malekith was the most famous. Tens of thousands of years ago, Malekith had been defeated by Odin and Wells. But that fellow managed to slip away every time. He was an extremely troublesome figure. "You'd better take it easy," Wells teased, "don't let another Hela incident happen." Unlike the rumors from the outside world, ever since the 9 realms were unified, Wells had not managed Asgard's political affairs at all. Because of that, there had not been the slightest conflict between the 2 brothers up to this day. Their relationship was still very close. That rebellious daughter. Hearing his younger brother mention Hela, Odin's face became somewhat angry. A few days ago, I went to Mother's place. I originally wanted her to lower her head to me, but she hid instead. She didn't even have the courage to see me. Wells also laughed. Ha ha ha. When he had gone to Kathleen's bedchamber a few days ago, Wells had sensed Hela's aura. Odin had also been there at the time, and Wells knew Hela was hiding from her father. You father and daughter have the exact same personality. Wells continued, neither of you will submit to the other, and both of you think you're right. Stubborn tempers. Because of Wells's intervention, Hela's fate had already undergone earth-shaking changes. The Valkyrie core had not been destroyed, and she did not carry any blood debt on her hands. So, looking at it now, Hela's crimes were not that serious. Odin was the king of Asgard, the king of the gods among the 9 realms. It was impossible for him to lower his head. Yet Hela happened to have inherited her father's personality, making reconciliation between father and daughter almost impossible. Wells also had a headache over this. By the way, Odin clearly did not want to continue this topic. Have you made up your mind? Are you truly going to marry Miss Hannah? Wells merely shrugged and said indifferently, I have my own plans. Oh. Odin raised his brow slightly. Then I'll have people make the arrangements. This time, we need to make it grand. After all, you are royalty, and this is also an opportunity for Asgard to display itself to the outside world and let them know how powerful Asgard is. Wells nodded. Just do it according to your thoughts. Although he said that, Wells had still underestimated Odin's determination. For his younger brother's wedding, Asgard spent an entire 30 years preparing. Nearly everyone in the 9 realms knew that Asgard's Prince Wells was going to get married. However, just as the long-awaited day was about to arrive, the main character vanished from Asgard. In Queen Kathleen's bedchamber, Asgard's former queen, Kathleen, looked at the letter left behind by her youngest son. Her lips trembled, and in the end, she tore the letter in her hand into pieces in uncontrollable rage. What is this brat doing? How can marriage be treated like a child's game? Isn't this making everyone laugh at us? The wedding of Odin's younger brother was already the grandest ceremony the 9 realms had seen in nearly 100 years. Numerous warrior corps had rehearsed countless times, all because they wanted to display Asgard's strength to outsiders on the wedding day. But unexpectedly, that fellow had left without even looking back. Perhaps Uncle Wells. Hela said softly to her grandmother, he noticed something. If you were to leave this world after he got married, then he would rather choose not to marry. Humph. Queen Kathleen said coldly, no wonder he agreed so readily before. So it turns out he never planned to get married at all. Kathleen had heard many people speak of the wisdom of this youngest son of hers, but she had never imagined that one day, she herself would experience it firsthand. Your Majesty. At this moment, a beautiful woman appeared at the entrance of the bedchamber. Her long, dark, glossy hair was especially eye-catching. Hannah, the pride of the elven race, the woman envied by all women in the 9 realms. Yet at this moment, her eyes were red, and her face was filled with sorrow. Seeing this woman arrive, Kathleen's expression became unnatural. That little bastard had secretly slipped away, leaving all the trouble to her. Kathleen comforted her softly, Hannah, don't worry. Although Wells has left, I acknowledge you as my daughter-in-law. From now on, you are Wells's wife. That little bastard, if he dares bully you in the future, I'll be the first one not to agree. Hearing Kathleen's words, Hannah immediately became excited. She knew Queen Kathleen's status. As long as this elder nodded in agreement, her position would be secure. Hannah bowed to Kathleen and thanked her. Thank you, Your Majesty. Kathleen took Hannah's hand and scolded with a smile, Are you still calling me Your Majesty? Hannah's face reddened, and she slowly said, Mother. Ah. Kathleen smiled with satisfaction. That's more like it. Everything here hasn't changed at all. On Earth, Wells pushed open the door to the villa he had not returned to in a long time. Seeing that most of the things inside the house had not changed, Wells said with a suspicious expression, Who has been cleaning this place? One had to know that Wells had been gone for more than 30 years. On Earth, that was already nearly half a lifetime. Groot sat down on the sofa beside him. Maybe it was that vampire. As he spoke, Groot kept staring at Wells. Wells felt his scalp go numb under his gaze. He kicked Groot with his foot and said in great dissatisfaction, "What are you staring at?" Groot had followed Wells since childhood. The two of them knew each other well, so naturally, Groot would not hide anything. Groot said to Wells, "Was Miss Hannah not beautiful enough? If I had known you were going to run away from the wedding, I wouldn't have left with you." "Enough. Enough." Wells quickly interrupted Groot. "What do you know?" Bang! At that moment, a knocking sound suddenly came from outside the house. Wells and Groot exchanged a glance, then stood up and walked outside. Creak! Wells opened the door, and an old woman with graying temples, wearing a cashmere cardigan and dressed very properly, appeared before his eyes. "Mr. Wells." When the old woman saw Wells's appearance, she cried out in surprise. "Mr. Wells, is that you?" "You?" Wells was startled. The image of the old woman before him overlapped with a memory in his mind. He called out softly, "Is it Mrs. Stark?" This old woman was Howard's wife, Tony Stark's mother. 30 years had passed, and she had already become an aged woman marked by time. "Mrs. Stark?" At this moment, Wells seemed to remember something. He quickly opened his mouth and asked, "Where's Mr. Howard?" Number 42. Disgusting thing. 30 years was nothing to the residents of Asgard. After all, the people of Asgard had extremely long lifespans. But to ordinary people of the earthly realm, 30 years was already nearly half a lifetime. It was definitely a span of time no one could ignore. Take Mrs. Stark, for example. When Wells left, she had still looked like a young woman. But now that Wells had returned, she was already an elderly woman with a head full of white hair. Time was truly too cruel to ordinary people. The old woman's face was full of sorrow. More than 10 years ago, there was a car accident. The old woman endured her grief, hesitating to continue. "He left me and Tony forever. Mr. Wells, back then, when you told my husband and me not to ride in the same car, did you already know this would happen?" Sigh. Wells's face was filled with melancholy. "Madam, I'm sorry. I cannot explain this matter to you in too much detail. In the original timeline, the Stark couple had died together at the hands of the Winter Soldier. However, because of Wells's reminder, Howard's wife had survived. No. Perhaps those people's target had only been Howard. Howard's wife had merely been an insignificant, dispensable person. Mr. Wells," Mrs. Stark said with grief and anger, "the police told me Howard died in a car accident. But a few days before my husband died, he received a message. The letter warned us not to go out recently. I suspect my husband was murdered. Mr. Wells, someone murdered Howard." "A letter? A warning? There was such a thing?" Several question marks appeared in Wells's mind. Suddenly, an inconspicuous name surfaced. Goof. It could only be Goof. The last time Wells stayed in the earthly realm had not been very long. In total, he had not known many people there, and the only person who could send a message to the Stark family was Goof. When Wells had parted with Goof last time, he had told him information about the Tesseract and casually bestowed a curse mark upon him. With that curse mark, even if Goof could not live to 100, he could still possess a lifespan longer than ordinary people. Goof should not be dead yet. From the look of it, he had even become one of Hydra's higher-ups. Otherwise, he absolutely would not have known such high-level information. One had to know that Howard's status in S.H.I.E.L.D. was quite high. Assassinating him was equivalent to openly challenging S.H.I.E.L.D.'s dignity. Wells thought for a while. "Madam, I do know the murderer who killed Mr. Howard. I know the Stark family is very rich, but you are not a match for those people. I truly cannot tell you right now. Stark Industries could be considered a famous leading enterprise in this country, but at present, it was still not a match for Hydra. Wells was afraid Mrs. Howard would do something foolish. If that happened, it would only anger Hydra and create more trouble. All right. Seeing Wells's sincere expression, the old woman finally said nothing more. Her body trembled as she walked back toward her villa. The woman looked unsteady on her feet, and Wells felt somewhat unable to bear it. Wells muttered to himself, "It seems Mrs. Howard really is deeply saddened. She actually didn't notice my appearance." Groot nodded in deep agreement. "MHM." The appearances of the two of them were basically no different from 30 years ago. If it had been anyone else, they would definitely have been exposed. Wells and Groot would probably have been treated as monsters by others. But Mrs. Stark had long been filled with grief and anger, and she had actually failed to notice this point. "Let's go," Wells urged. "We're going to meet the old bat." Dracula, an old monster who had lived for hundreds of years, the underworld godfather of this city. Ever since his birth, Dracula's life had been smooth sailing. But ever since that man walked into his castle, his life had undergone earth-shaking changes. The vampire known as the Godfather had now actually become someone else's lackey. 30 years had passed. Dracula had originally thought that man had long since left this planet, but he had never expected him to return today. Inside Dracula's ancient castle, the old bat Dracula trembled as he handed Wells a cigar, then bowed and personally lit it for him. Phew! A smoke ring spread through the air. Wells let out a long breath. "I didn't expect a bat like you to have pretty decent taste." He. Dracula's face twitched, and he only laughed dryly a few times. In truth, Dracula was 100 times unwilling in his heart. However, the situation was stronger than him. This person could kill him as easily as turning over his hand, so Dracula could only lower his proud head. "Sit." Wells crossed his legs and signaled Dracula to sit beside him. "This is my home, all right? Damn it, this guy really doesn't treat himself as an outsider." Dracula silently cursed in his heart. Wells continued, "Did anything happen while I was gone?" "Nothing much." Dracula sat down, and his mind slowly relaxed. "It's just that the conflict between Hydra and the Strategic Scientific Reserve has become more and more serious." As the underworld godfather of this city, Dracula was one of the few who knew about S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Wells nodded slightly, a thoughtful look appearing on his face. Decades ago, Wells had eliminated one of Hydra's bases. Hydra would probably place that debt on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s head. Meanwhile, Hydra had also killed Howard, one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s core figures. If the relationship between these two organizations was not tense now, that would truly be strange. After a long while, Wells shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Let that big black man Nick Fury worry about Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. Wells continued asking, "How is Tony Stark now?" When he had just spoken with Mrs. Howard, the old woman's emotions had fluctuated too intensely, so much so that he had not had time to inquire about Tony Stark. Had that little guy from back then already become Iron Man now? The old bat licked his lips and said with a sinister smile, "Tony Stark is still very smart. After Howard died, he took over Stark Industries. Under his leadership over these years, Stark Industries has grown larger and larger, almost monopolizing this country's arms business. But..." The old bat's tone changed. "But Tony Stark is also quite the playboy. Over the past few years, he has spent every night drinking and indulging himself. The company's board of shareholders has become increasingly dissatisfied with him." "Good." Hearing the old bat's words, Wells finally relaxed. While he was in Asgard, this had been precisely what he was worried about. If he missed the birth of Iron Man, then one move would affect the whole board. One step slow, every step slow. Right? The old bat's eyes suddenly flickered. Regarding that secret, he did not know whether he should say it. Wells looked at Dracula in confusion. "What is it?" Wells had placed a seal on Dracula's body. At this moment, he had already sensed fluctuations in the old bat's emotions. What exactly had happened to make this centuries-old bat experience such strong emotions? Dracula remained silent for a while. In the end, he said fiercely, "Someone, bring that thing up. Although Dracula wanted to keep that treasure for himself, he had never dared to confirm what kind of thing it actually was. Even though he was also a creature who had lived for hundreds of years, he was still extremely wary of things from beyond the universe. Yes. Hearing Dracula's words, two giant men carried out a large box. Wells stood up from the sofa. What's inside this? After the large box was set down, Dracula quickly drove the two giant men out. He excitedly came to the front of the box and, as if presenting a contribution, pulled away the cloth covering it. Dracula said excitedly, "This is a real treasure. A few years ago, a meteorite fell from the sky. I have a scientist friend who was responsible for collecting meteorites scattered in various places. But later, he discovered that along with the meteorite came a kind of life form. Cells extracted from it can even treat cancer." After the cloth was pulled away, Wells discovered that the box was actually vacuum sealed. Inside, a creature like a mass of black mud was wriggling. Seeing that black mud, Wells's pupils shrank, and he cried out in shock, "Venom? Why did you collect something like this?" The thing inside the box, that mass of black mud, was none other than Venom from the Marvel universe. This old bat had really lived all these years for nothing. Why did he have to get involved with something like this for no reason? He was truly like an old man eating arsenic because he thought he had lived too long. Venom was an unusual existence in the Marvel universe. It did not possess overwhelmingly powerful attack power. What made people worry was its parasitic ability. It would grow stronger along with its host, and during that time, it would gradually devour the host, causing the host to slowly become Venom's puppet. Completely eliminating it was practically harder than ascending to the heavens. What? The old bat came to the side of the box. He reached out and touched the glass, speaking as if he had obtained a priceless treasure. "This is a good thing. It's been in my castle for half a year, but I still don't know how to use it. Damn it." Wells cursed loudly. "Get away from it. Do you really think this vacuum isolation chamber can stop it?" Crack! Crack! The black mud seemed to sense something. It pressed itself against the glass, and the vacuum isolation chamber shattered in response. Splash! The black mud leapt forward and landed directly on top of Dracula's head. It stood on Dracula's body, and the liquid on its surface began flowing downward like a waterfall. Ah! Dracula also sensed that something was wrong. He used all his strength to break free from the black mud's restraints, but the mass of black mud stuck to his body like glue. No matter how he struggled, he could not shake it off. Number 43. Devouring. Half a minute later, the black sludge and Dracula completely fused into one. Dracula's blood-red cloak had now turned entirely black. Under the dim light, Dracula was filled with an evil aura, like a baron from hell. Wells had already secretly prepared himself for battle, but for safety's sake, he still asked carefully, "Are you all right?" Venom would not directly devour its host. It would slowly change the host's nature over time, turning them completely into a puppet. Dracula took a deep breath, his face filled with joy he could barely suppress. "Of course I'm fine. This power. Such powerful strength truly exists in this world." An old monster who had lived for hundreds of years actually had such a poor state of mind. Hearing the old bat's words, Wells's heart sank. If Dracula became too dependent on the power Venom brought him, then it would not take long before he became Venom's puppet completely. At that time, even if his body still existed, he would be nothing more than a walking corpse. "Don't speak." Wells lifted his eyelids. "I want to talk to Venom." Wells knew Venom had already survived. With a vampire's body as nourishment, it would become stronger than ever before. He. At that moment, an extremely unpleasant laugh suddenly rang out from within Dracula's body. "What?" Dracula's expression changed, and then he cried out in panic, completely at a loss. What exactly is going on? Inside his own body, Dracula actually sensed the existence of another consciousness. What on earth had happened? Ha ha ha. Dracula shook his head. He looked around with curiosity, then said rather happily, "This body is much stronger than my previous host's." Damn it. This old bat's willpower was far too poor. Seeing that Venom had already completely taken control of the old bat's body, Wells's impression of the old bat greatly worsened. Venom and its host had a symbiotic relationship. For this Venom to take control of Dracula's body in just a few minutes was truly beyond Wells's expectations. "Groot," Wells said in a deep voice, "teach him a lesson. Let him know who the master here is." More than 30 years ago, Wells had placed a seal on Dracula. Even if Venom now occupied Dracula's body, Wells had a way to destroy all vitality within Dracula's body. But Wells could not do that. As the underworld godfather of this city, Dracula would still be useful to him in the future. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Wells would never choose to burn his bridges. "Okay." Groot nodded, clenched his fists, and charged straight at Dracula. Sensing the pressure in the air, Venom realized something was wrong. His face hardened, and he pushed both palms forward without hesitation, meeting Groot head-on with a palm strike. Clang! A cold wind howled through the room, and many porcelain pieces Dracula had treasured for hundreds of years fell to the floor one after another. Thud! 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 Venom took one step back, while Groot retreated 2 full steps. "This Venom," Wells muttered in confusion, "something's not right." Groot had followed Wells since childhood, fighting campaigns across the world with him. He had exchanged blows with experts from every race in the 9 realms. With the strength he possessed now, even in Asgard, where experts were as common as clouds, he could very likely rank among the top 10. Yet against this Venom, he had fallen into a disadvantage after only one exchange. What kind of joke was this? I didn't expect. Venom was also startled. I didn't expect this backward planet to actually have a powerful being like you. I was once the former leader of my race, yet the moment I arrived here, someone gave me a show of force. Leader of his race? Hearing this, Wells's heart finally calmed down. In the original work, Venom was not that strong. If every single one of them were as powerful as the Venom before him, Wells would not bother resisting. Because all resistance would be futile. The Venom race would have the power to dominate the entire Marvel universe. However, if this Venom was the king of the entire race, then everything made sense. It was far stronger than the Venom in the storyline. First, it seized control of Dracula's body in an instant, then defeated Groot in a single exchange. It was indeed worthy of the title King of the Race. Sigh. Seeing that Groot was about to charge forward again, Wells stopped him. You're not his opponent. I'll play with him. Wells rubbed his arm, then walked straight up to Venom. Come on. I'll play with you. If you beat me, the old bat's body is yours. Arrogant. Seeing Wells's dismissive attitude, Venom laughed in anger. I'll tear you into pieces. Enough nonsense. The moment Wells finished speaking, his body moved like a bolt of lightning. Before Venom could finish his words, Wells's fist had already smashed heavily into his head. Peh. Venom retreated again. Feeling the pain on his face, he spat harshly. Again. This Venom was also straightforward. Without another word, he charged at Wells again. Bang! Bang! Their speed was extremely fast. Even Groot could only catch a few afterimages. Boom! 2 black wings spread open behind Venom. He dragged Wells's body and forcefully flew out. Seeing this, Wells stomped hard against the sky, and ripples immediately spread through the void. A trace of unease rose in Venom's heart. He quickly separated from Wells, and the 2 stood in the air, one on the left and one on the right. Looking at Wells's expressionless face ahead, Venom's expression grew heavier and heavier. You are definitely not from this planet. Which world are you a powerhouse from? The strength of the enemy before him had exceeded Venom's expectations. It was hard to imagine that such a weak planet would actually possess someone this powerful. Have you heard of Asgard? Wells replied, "If you've heard of Asgard, then naturally, you've heard of my name." Ever since the unification of the 9 realms, Wells had not fought someone fist to fist, flesh against flesh, for a very long time. The Venom before him was an opponent worthy of battle. "Asgard?" Venom said suspiciously, "The 9 realms? Are you Odin?" The 9 realms was a powerful alliance of realms. Even in the entire universe, it was a top-tier force with a name that carried weight. Ever since a man named Odin unified the many races there, the 9 realms had become even more famous throughout the universe. "No, no." Wells shook his head repeatedly. "Odin is my elder brother." After hearing Wells's words, Venom's expression changed. "Are the 9 realms really that powerful?" Immediately afterward, Venom seemed to think of something. If I were to reside in this man's body. After returning to Asgard in the 9 realms, I could use this man as a springboard and finally reside in the body of the God King Odin. Odin was a mighty powerhouse famous throughout the entire universe. It was said that not only was his own strength tremendous, but the elite soldiers and powerful generals under his command were countless. He was an overlord-like figure. Thinking of this, Venom's breathing immediately became rapid. "Come, then. Let's fight." Venom crossed his hands, and his black arms instantly transformed into 2 giant scythes. As he opened and closed his attacks, he looked like a god of death harvesting lives. Boom! An even more brutal battle erupted once again. Under the moonlit night, a pair of black wings spread behind Venom, and his giant scythes whistled through the air. Wells could only avoid their sharp edge, fighting while retreating. "He's actually being suppressed." Seeing that Wells did not dare take the scythe's attacks directly, Groot's expression slowly became serious. Groot had grown up with Wells since childhood. In tens of thousands of years, this was the first time he had seen Wells in such a sorry state. Ha ha ha. At some point, Venom had already arrived beside Wells. He placed his arm on Wells's body, and immediately afterward, the venom that had originally possessed Dracula's body rapidly burrowed toward Wells. Not good. Feeling venom wriggling toward his body, Wells finally became anxious at this moment. When Venom had extended the scythes just now, Wells had already sensed its intention, so he had been avoiding Venom's attacks the entire time. Unexpectedly, Venom still managed to find an opening. Venom's greatest ability was possession. That was what made it the most feared. "Where am I?" After Venom left Dracula's body, Dracula looked around in confusion. When he saw the black writhing substance on Wells's body, he finally remembered everything. "You damn thing, get away from him!" Dracula shouted, "Your Highness Wells, hurry and make that thing leave. That damn thing is too terrifying." But at this moment, how could Wells hear Dracula's cries? His 4 senses seemed to have been sealed off. His vision went black, as if he had fallen into an endless abyss. "I may not be able to seize your body right now." Venom's voice rang faintly beside Wells's ear. "But I have enough patience to turn you into my puppet. Your body is truly amazing." "Oh. You actually have an Infinity Stone too. Ha ha, now it's mine." Venom seemed to have discovered an enormous treasure. It sank into it, and for a moment, its emotions became extremely excited. Damn it. Wells's body collapsed to the ground, but he had no time to check the injuries to his flesh. In the deepest part of his spirit, he was desperately fighting Venom for control of his own body. Ah! Venom suddenly roared, "What the hell are all these things?" A terrifying wave suddenly surged through Wells's spirit. Venom trembled as it looked at the blurry figures ahead. They stretched as far as the eye could see, numbering several hundred in total. Number 44. The ancestors of Valhalla. Those several hundred figures were very blurry. But in Venom's eyes, every single one of them carried an indescribable aura. That aura strongly rejected it, making Venom feel a chill from the depths of its heart. Those figures stared at Venom. Vaguely, they seemed to be whispering. "Who is this guy? The aura on him is truly disgusting. So ugly. So foul. Some voices entered Venom's ears in fragments. Hearing those words, Venom was furious. What exactly are you things? One had to know that Venom was also the leader of a race. On ordinary days, it commanded thousands upon thousands of troops, and no one had ever dared defy its orders. Today, after hearing such humiliating words, how could it possibly endure? Things? The several hundred figures said in unison, when we were fighting across the 9 realms, your mommy hadn't even been born yet. How could such a filthy thing like you exist in this world? Fighting? Suddenly, Venom seemed to remember something. It cried out in shock, you are the heroic spirits who died in battle. Every universe had its own traditions. Venom had heard that in these 9 realms, the descendants of heroes who once died fighting for their race would gather the souls of those heroes and await their future resurrection. Their souls received the worship of later generations. Without realizing it, they had become the purest things in the world, radiant, noble, and righteous, the natural bane of all evil spirits. That's right. Among the figures, someone responded, we should have died, but you inexplicably barged in and disturbed our peace. Slap. Before that person could finish speaking, another person among the figures fiercely slapped the back of his head. You little brat, with so many seniors here, is it your place to speak? Great uncle. The person who had just spoken shouted, don't think I don't know what you're thinking. When I was in power, you raised an army in rebellion. It just so happened that the powerful beings of Hell's underworld invaded at that time, so you turned around and died together with the monarch of the underworld. My son only allowed you into Valhalla because you understood the greater good. I couldn't let you enter Valhalla while I was alive, so that slap was definitely you using public authority for private revenge. The person in the shadows retorted sharply, bullshit. That position was originally mine. Enough. At that moment, a tall figure softly stopped them. Do not let outsiders laugh at us. After that tall figure spoke, the originally chaotic voices disappeared in the next second. The several hundred figures all looked at that tall figure with reverence. His name had long since vanished from history, but his identity would forever be remembered. Even his enemies had called him the First Warrior. Asgard's first warrior possessed battle strength that shook both ancient and modern times. Seeing that figure, blazing like a scorching sun and seemingly on the verge of manifesting, Venom's expression became solemn to the extreme. There is actually such a person in this world. If this person were still alive, it was hard to imagine what level of achievement he would have reached by now. He would probably be an existence capable of making the entire universe tremble. Phew. Wells also manifested an illusory figure within his spiritual sea. He bowed toward the several hundred figures and said, this descendant is incompetent and has disturbed the rest of the ancestors. Just now, Venom and Wells had been fighting over control of the body. But of all the things Venom should never have done, it should never have dived into the deepest part of Wells's spirit. Ever since receiving the infusion from the many sages of Valhalla, the souls of Valhalla had completely disappeared. If Venom had not disturbed them this time, Wells would never have known that these people still had remnants of their souls within his spiritual sea. You are very good. The first warrior looked at Wells with a smile. Just now, I looked through the memories in your mind regarding the 9 realms. You and your elder brother are both very good. The unification of the 9 realms was possible because of the great merit of you 2 brothers. The unification of the 9 realms had been the dream of generations of Asgardian sages. Now that this wish had been fulfilled, the sacrifice of Valhalla had not been in vain. I dare not. Wells lowered his head extremely low. It was all thanks to the achievements of the many seniors. My brother and I merely followed the tide of history. Before these ancestors, Wells did not dare act arrogant. If they had not laid such a firm foundation, how could he and his elder brother have conquered the 9 realms so smoothly? Forget it. The first warrior did not continue this topic with Wells. He shifted his gaze back to Venom. We are all already dead, so we cannot give you much help now. However, if it wants to occupy your body, that is absolutely impossible. Brothers. The first warrior waved his hand. Someone wants to steal the body of our descendant. Can we agree to that? The souls that could sleep peacefully in Valhalla were either former kings of Asgard or warriors who had died fighting for Asgard. Yet every one of them had also poured their cultivation into Wells. In a certain sense, Wells was the inheritor of their legacy. This was a relationship that surpassed bloodline. The several hundred figures shouted, "Of course we can't agree." Then what do we do? Of course we beat him down. The many souls of Valhalla cursed and shouted. Good. The first warrior looked at Venom with a firm gaze. Let this filthy thing know the power of Valhalla. Charge. After the words fell, one person took the lead and charged forward. Seeing that person, Wells froze slightly, because he discovered that the outline of that person's face was very similar to his father's. That person seemed to sense Wells. He turned back and looked at Wells. The two gazed at each other from afar, and in the end, he silently nodded. When Wells was young, he had heard his mother speak of some past events of Asgard. She said Bor's father had been a man who rarely smiled and looked very serious. Now that he thought back on it, Wells felt his mother's words were not right. Although grandfather looked very stern, in his heart, he had never forgotten his descendants. Others often said that having one elder in the family was like possessing a treasure. Now, things were good for Wells, he had several hundred treasures. An unfamiliar emotion ignited in Wells's heart. Ever since coming to this world, he had never felt something like this before. Seeing those several hundred people charge toward it, Venom immediately lost its composure. Almost all of these people were blessed by faith. If they joined forces, it was absolutely not their opponent. Spare me. Venom shouted loudly, spare me. But very quickly, Venom's voice was drowned out by the roaring cries. Before long, only miserable screams remained. It's done. Seeing this scene, Wells murmured softly. With so many ancestors charging into battle for him this time, it was equivalent to picking up a great opportunity for free. After the battle ended, everyone sat cross-legged on the ground, while Wells sat in the center, answering the questions of each ancestor one by one. How could Venom possibly have been a match for this group of fierce old men? Venom's dying screams could be said to make listeners sorrowful and bring tears to the eyes of anyone who heard them. Wells even wondered whether he had done something wrong. Wells, the first warrior said, when you were in Valhalla before, you once mentioned Ragnarok. Now that Asgard has unified the 9 realms, will Ragnarok still come? Hearing the first warrior's words, Wells opened his mouth, but for a moment, he was actually speechless. In the main storyline, Ragnarok happened after Odin's death, when Hela invaded Asgard. Thor was unable to defeat her and released the fire giant Surtur, causing the two of them to perish together. Asgard was destroyed, and its people were forced to leave their homeland. That was the true Ragnarok. But now, Hela had been living inside Queen Catherine's bedchamber all along. Invading Asgard? Impossible. Hela had always lived in Asgard. How could there be any invasion? As for Surtur, as long as either Wells or Odin was still alive, even if Surtur revived, he would not be a match for the two brothers. The future had already changed. Then what exactly was Ragnarok now? There was also the matter that made Wells most vigilant. Before Agamotto died, he had peered into the future. When the 6 stones gathered, all life in the universe would disappear. Could this have some connection to Ragnarok? I don't know either. Wells shook his head. He did not want to deceive these people. In the future, there may be a universe-wide crisis. Perhaps Asgard will not be able to remain uninvolved. Agamotto's prophecy had not come from nowhere. These days, Wells had been pondering this matter constantly. He currently held the Reality Stone. If Thanos wanted to collect all 6 Infinity Stones, he would inevitably have to pass through Wells first. At that time, Wells would face Thanos head-on. You are already very strong now. The first warrior remained silent for a moment, then said somewhat dispiritedly, we can no longer give you much help. Everyone from Valhalla here, including the first warrior himself, only had a wisp of remnant soul left. When they left Valhalla, they had already disappeared. If Venom had not recklessly barged in this time, they would not have awakened from the depths of Wells's memories. However, this did not mean they still possessed much strength. The reason they could destroy Venom just now was because they received offerings from the people of Asgard. The power of radiant, noble, and righteous faith was the natural bane of many evil spirits. "No," Wells hurriedly said, "you have already given me so much. Without you, I would never have achieved what I have today." After coming to this world, Wells did not possess any cheat-like golden finger. The reason he had reached this point today came down to two factors. The first was the reality stone among the 6 stones. The second was the inheritance of Valhalla. Without them, Wells would only be an ordinary member of the Asgardian royal family. "The rest of the road will be up to you." The first warrior smiled at Wells, like a bright and spirited young man. At the same time, his figure also grew fainter and fainter. Number 45. Arrival. First warrior. Watching the first warrior's phantom grow fainter and fainter, Wells shouted loudly, Your Highness! Your Highness!" At that moment, Groot's voice rang beside Wells's ear. Opening his eyes, Wells discovered that he had already withdrawn from the deepest part of his spirit. Groot and Dracula both looked at him with vigilance in their eyes. The two of them had both witnessed Venom's abilities. If Venom had taken over Wells's body, then no matter what, the two of them could not allow Venom to escape. "My body." Wells stood up and was shocked to discover a surging power within his body, as if it were endless. He said excitedly, "My body has been strengthened once again." Although Venom resided in its host, it had to be said that it did indeed strengthen the host's body. For example, Wells at this moment. Although Venom was already dead, Wells's strength had increased explosively. Whether it was speed or physique, Wells was no longer the same as before. "What a pity." Wells seemed to think of something and said with great regret, "Venom could evolve into all kinds of weapons. That part, I didn't inherit." When he had fought Venom earlier, Venom's 2 arms had transformed into 2 enormous scythes. That transformation was an innate ability of Venom, but with Venom's death, that rather unique ability had completely disappeared. This left Wells feeling quite regretful. Venom had only strengthened Wells's body. As for its other abilities, they seemed to have vanished completely along with Venom's death. "Your Highness," Groot asked carefully, "are you all right?" Earlier, before Dracula lost himself, he had also been immersed in the growth of his power and unable to pull himself free. In the end, he had quickly lost himself. Groot was afraid that Wells would become a second Dracula. "I'm fine." Wells comforted Groot, "Don't worry. Venom is already dead. It just had to go and provoke a bunch of old monsters." Thinking of the many souls in the Hall of Valor, Wells's mood became somewhat heavy. If nothing unexpected had happened, then the souls in the Hall of Valor had truly vanished this time. "It's getting late," Wells said softly, "let's leave this place." Originally, Wells had wanted to ask the old bat for some information, but he had not expected to encounter such a thing. At this moment, he no longer had his previous mindset. After speaking, Wells did not wait for Groot to answer. He leaped into the sky and flew directly toward the direction of his villa. Groot exchanged a few more polite words with the old bat before leaving Dracula's ancient castle. Seeing the pitted marks on the ground, Dracula wanted to cry but had no tears. He sighed repeatedly. Who the hell could have known something like this would happen? On the road, Groot kept asking Wells about various things. Seeing that Wells answered smoothly and without hesitation, Groot finally let out a sigh of relief. It was finally certain that Wells's body had not been occupied by that filthy thing. In Wells's villa, Wells spent several pleasant weekends. Meanwhile, far away in Asgard, there was someone who had already cursed Wells's ancestors 18 generations over. Heimdall. A woman with long, glossy black hair scolded Heimdall, "His Highness Wells clearly left through the Bifrost, and you're telling me you don't know where he went?" This woman looked about 23 or 24 years old. She was graceful and charming, with an extremely beautiful appearance, like a celestial beauty who had stepped out of a painting. "Miss Hannah." Heimdall revealed a smile uglier than crying. It's not that I don't know. Before His Highness left, he specifically told me not to reveal his whereabouts. Hannah, Asgard's second princess consort, was currently deeply favored by the former queen, Kathleen. On top of that, her personality was gentle and elegant, so the entire Asgardian royal family liked her very much now. But Heimdall could not understand why the young prince's woman would treat him so fiercely. Fine. Hannah laughed from sheer anger. You won't tell me, right? I'll go find Big Brother Odin right now and have him come ask you himself. Originally, Hannah had also been an extremely gentle and refined woman. But a few days ago had been her great wedding day, and her man had disappeared. No matter how good Hannah's temperament was, it was difficult for her to accept such an outcome. Queen Kathleen had indeed promised her status, and Hannah could give up on the wedding, but as a woman, she had to know news of her husband. No, no. Heimdall quickly stopped Hannah. His Majesty has already entered slumber. Let's not disturb him. In truth, there were still some words Heimdall did not say. The reason Odin had entered slumber was actually to avoid the storm, because he also felt that he had wronged Hannah. I'll tell you. Heimdall said in a deep voice, I'll tell you, all right? No. Hearing Heimdall's words, Hannah immediately beamed with joy. Just send me over directly. Upon hearing this, Heimdall grew a little anxious. Didn't you only want? But before Heimdall could finish speaking, Hannah immediately interrupted him. Enough nonsense. Hurry up. All right. Heimdall could not help shaking his head. I'll send you over. That brat is living freely on Earth every day. Why should I cover for him? I might as well let that brat deal with the headache himself. Thinking of this, Heimdall's mood instantly became much smoother. He smiled and said, Miss Hannah, I'll send you directly to His Highness's home so you spend less time on the road and reunite with His Highness sooner. Boom. Before long, a beam of light shot straight from Asgard toward Earth. Seeing Hannah disappear, Heimdall finally let out a sigh of relief. Bang! Bang! A burst of urgent knocking sounded. Wells and Groot, who were originally drinking gloomily inside the house, exchanged a glance, but neither of them got up. Wells picked up the bottle and took another swig. You go open the door. Why don't you go? Although he said that, Groot still stood up. He muttered unhappily, I'm basically your family's servant. Who is it? Groot shouted irritably. Creak. Groot opened the door, and Hannah's unbelievably beautiful face appeared before his eyes. Groot instantly sobered up. His mouth fell open as he said, Hannah. Back then, Wells had also stayed in Asgard for more than 30 years. Therefore, Groot was not unfamiliar with Wells's fiancée, Hannah. Why is there such a strong smell of alcohol? Hannah slipped past Groot and walked into the house. Her nose twitched, and then she said, Your place is really messy. As she spoke, Hannah had already taken off her long outer robe. While cleaning up the trash on the table, she said, I really don't know how you can live here. Hannah did not treat herself as an outsider at all. In Groot's eyes, she already looked like the mistress of this villa. Your Highness. Seeing this scene, Groot immediately shouted, Your Highness, look who's here. Although Groot had followed Wells for tens of thousands of years and the two were as close as brothers, he did not dare say anything about Hannah, because Groot knew that Hannah was the daughter-in-law Queen Kathleen had chosen for her youngest son. This was something Wells could not deny no matter what. What are you doing? At this moment, Wells drunkenly walked over while holding a wine bottle. But when he saw the beautiful figure ahead, it was as if 10,000 tons of pressure fell upon his right hand. The bottle in his hand dropped straight to the floor. Smash! A crisp sound rang out, and the wine bottle in Wells's hand shattered across the ground. Hannah. Wells looked as if he had seen a ghost. He said in shock, Why are you here? Woo! It would have been better if Wells had not spoken. The moment he opened his mouth, Hannah could no longer hold back. Tears poured from her eyes. She came before Wells, hugged him, and cried, "Do I really make you dislike me that much? If you don't like me, you could have refused this marriage." Hannah's graceful body leaned into Wells's arms. A fresh fragrance drifted into Wells's nose, and he stood awkwardly in place. He. Seeing Wells's defeated expression, Groot laughed a few times and schadenfreude. "Get lost." Wells's eyes widened, and he glared fiercely at Groot. He. Groot laughed with ill intent, then began walking outside. "Stop crying." After seeing Groot walk out, Wells finally placed his hands carefully on Hannah's waist and comforted her softly. "This matter was my fault." Toward Hannah, Wells had always felt guilt in his heart. She was a good girl. If Wells married her, he believed Hannah would definitely be a virtuous wife and loving mother. But Wells knew he could not do that. He could not watch his mother leave with his own eyes. In his previous life, Wells had been an orphan, so he valued family more than anyone else. Hearing Wells's words, Hannah did not speak, but she also did not stop crying. After about half an hour, Hannah raised her head and looked at Wells, then choked out, "Don't you know how to say something comforting?" Wells wiped Hannah's tears for her, then said helplessly, "I'm not good at talking. It's better if I don't say anything. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll make you angry." Although he had lived for tens of thousands of years, Wells's understanding of women was still stuck in his previous life. When it came to matters of love, he was a natural idiot. Now that the heavens had sent him a wife as beautiful as a flower in the moon, this was practically the heavens testing him. Hannah pouted and said, "I don't believe you. You are the dignified second prince of Asgard. There must be countless beauties around you. You're definitely lying to me." "It's true," Wells said aggrievedly. "When have I ever had countless beauties around me?" Groot can testify to that. Number 46. A wonderful sound. The way Hannah slept was like a clumsy little wildcat. Wells gently covered her with the blanket. Seeing her adorably naive appearance, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Sleep for a while," Wells said softly. "You're already very tired." After saying that, Wells left Hannah's bedside. Sensing that Wells had already left, Hannah immediately opened her eyes. Somewhat dissatisfied, she said, "What an iron blockhead." Hannah's face flushed bright red. She buried her head under the blanket and muttered to herself, "What exactly are you thinking?" Hearing the soft mutters and whispers from inside the room, Wells smiled and shook his head. Although Hannah looked only 23 or 24 on the outside, her true age was not small at all. In the realm of the elves, she had once handled government affairs for the Elven Grand Elder for hundreds of years. If Asgard had not ruled over the 9 realms, perhaps she would have become the first queen of the elven race. That fast. Outside the villa, seeing Wells walk out of the room, Groot curled his lips with ill intentions. "Not going to stay warm a little longer?" Go. Wells kicked Groot and scolded with a smile, "What exactly is inside that wooden head of yours?" Although Wells kicked him, Groot still grinned. He. Wells no longer paid attention to Groot. "I'll sleep with you. The two of us will squeeze together tonight." The next morning, Wells woke up early. However, when he saw that the villa, which had originally been messy and chaotic, had become orderly and completely refreshed, Wells was stunned. "You're awake." At this moment, Hannah was especially beautiful. Her wave-like hair danced in the wind, her elegant nose was high and delicate, and her skin was so tender it seemed it would break with a touch, white as frost and snow, like the goddess Lua rising from the water. She carried a bowl of hot porridge and walked toward Wells. "The ingredients here are much worse than in Asgard, so I could only make you a simple breakfast." Good. Wells's throat tightened. He said vaguely, "In the morning, I usually just eat a little." Mr. Wells. Not long after Wells sat down, an aged voice called from outside. "Mrs. Howard?" Hearing that voice, Wells immediately stood up and hurried outside. A moment later, Wells asked the old woman outside, "Madam, what happened?" Seeing Wells, Mrs. Howard seemed to have found her pillar of support. With a tearful face, she said, "Mr. Wells, I heard from the people at the company that Tony disappeared. The military searched for him for a long time, but there's been no news at all. Has it begun? Has it finally begun?" Wells's heart trembled, and the expression on his face became somewhat dazed. Iron Man could be said to be the starting point of the Marvel Universe. It was precisely because of his sudden emergence that more and more heroes walked from the darkness into the open. In the Avengers, Iron Man's position could absolutely be ranked in the top 3. Mrs. Howard's hands trembled, and her face was already covered in tears. "Mr. Wells, your abilities are vast. For Howard's sake, please save this child. I can't lose him too. Tony is my last family member." Decades ago, a group of thugs had attacked their villa, and in the end, it had been Wells who saved their family of 3. At that time, Mrs. Howard had already known that Wells and Dracula were the underground kings of this city. Since the military had already given up searching for Tony, the old woman quickly came to Wells. In the old woman's impression, this Mr. Wells who lived beside her was an extremely powerful person. "Madam." Wells held Mrs. Howard's hand and comforted her. "Don't worry. Don't worry. Tony will definitely be fine. I will do everything I can to save Tony." In truth, even without Wells interfering, Tony Stark would survive this incident safe and sound. But seeing the old woman's anxious appearance, Wells could only tell a kind lie. "What happened?" At that moment, Hannah also walked out. Seeing Mrs. Howard tightly holding Wells's hand, almost crying herself into a tearful mess, Hannah asked in confusion, "Did something happen?" Seeing that there was someone else inside Wells's house, Mrs. Howard quickly turned around. As she wiped away her tears, she said softly, "Mr. Wells, is this lady your wife? She is truly beautiful." Hearing the word wife, Hannah smiled so widely she could barely close her mouth. She lowered her eyes and glanced at Wells. Seeing that Wells did not speak, the smile on her face grew even deeper. Hannah walked to Mrs. Howard's side and said softly to the old woman, "Madam, you truly have good eyes. I am Wells's fiancée. No, his mother has already approved of me." "Enough." Seeing Hannah getting more and more excited as she spoke, Wells interrupted her. "You stay with Mrs. Howard first. I need to go out for a few days." Stark had been taken to the Middle Eastern desert. Wells could only go there to find him. The time needed to go back and forth would take more than 10 days. Mrs. Howard's emotions were clearly somewhat unstable, and Wells did not want to bring Stark back after some time only to find that Mrs. Howard had already passed away. Hannah nodded her little head. "Don't worry. I'll take care of the old lady. When you come back, I'll cook noodles for you and let you taste my skills." The Middle Eastern desert was scorching hot all year round. Because wars had broken out frequently in recent years. This place was extremely poor. Legend had it that even God was unwilling to spread the sunlight of justice over this land. In a camp somewhere in the desert, Wells walked in with his face covered. Perhaps because of the poverty, almost no high-end technology could be seen here. Every soldier carried a submachine gun, but other than that, they did not even have the most basic access control system. To enter and leave, these people still relied on the most primitive method, a password. In this place, Wells had never worried about danger. Traditional firearms could no longer harm him. Wells's purpose in coming this time was to personally witness the birth of Iron Man. One had to know, this was a historic moment in the Marvel Universe. Wells slowly advanced behind a short man. This short man had been mentally invaded by Wells. Right now, he was nothing more than an unconscious walking corpse. "Mora." Just as Wells planned to continue moving forward, a guard stopped the short man. "Mora, what's wrong with you? Why do you look so listless?" Mora, the puppet controlled by Wells, had an extremely stiff expression. Hearing the guard's question, he wouldn't open his mouth. "These past few days, I seem to have felt the call of Allah." Mora's voice came out in broken fragments, like a robot without emotion. All right. The guard stopped Mora from continuing. Don't give me that mystical nonsense. Keep your eyes open recently. Don't let that Stark run away. If he escapes, all of us brothers from the 10 Rings will be finished. After saying that, the guard no longer paid attention to Mora. Wells controlled Mora's body and continued walking forward. Before long, Wells followed Mora to a large iron door. This was an extremely thick iron door. It was said that the 10 Rings had spent great effort to obtain it from England. Even a grenade could not blow it open. Clang! Clang! A series of striking sounds suddenly came from behind the door. Hearing that wonderful sound, like a piano being played, Wells smiled knowingly. Tony Stark was building the armor. Iron Man was about to be born. For this day, he had already waited a very long time. Exactly how far has Tony Stark progressed? That lord can no longer wait. Just as Wells was fully immersed in the sound of metal being struck, a man with a full beard led a group of people over. Seeing Mora and Wells beside the iron door, the bearded man frowned and said, "Mora, what are you doing here? Hurry up and open the door." This man with the full beard was the leader of this camp. At the same time, he was also the mastermind behind Tony Stark's kidnapping. Hearing the bearded man's words, Wells turned around and slowly pulled open the iron door together with Mora. Because he was afraid Tony's armor had not yet been completed, Wells did not use any strength while pulling the door. Because of that, the iron door opened very slowly. "Mora, you really are useless." After quite a while, seeing that the iron door still had not opened, the bearded man finally lost his patience. He pushed Mora and Wells aside, then led his underlings to pull the chains open themselves. Clatter. At this moment, Wells had already prepared to attack in secret. If Tony's iron armor had not been completed yet, he would directly kill these people, then close the door and wait for Tony to drive the Iron Man out by himself. Creak. The crack in the iron door grew wider and wider. At this moment, Wells's heart had risen to his throat. Boom! The crack was already wide enough for one person to pass through. But at this critical moment, a stream of flame burst out from behind the iron door. Ah! The flames spread onto several of the bearded man's subordinates, and they screamed in agony. Thud! Immediately after, a massive silver figure appeared within the dim cave. Everyone looked up and discovered that it was actually a giant armored robot. Boom! Another fire dragon flew toward them. Everyone's expression changed, and they hurriedly dodged in all directions. "I'm going to kill all of you." Inside the armor, Tony Stark sprayed flames while walking outward. Before long, his figure disappeared from everyone's sight. "Don't let him escape." The bearded man shouted, "Stop him. If he gets away and that gentleman blames us, we'll all die." Hearing their leader's words, the bearded man's subordinates picked up the submachine guns in their hands and hurriedly chased after him. Number 47. The Mandarin and the 10 Rings. Seeing that all his men had already chased after him, the bearded man remembered how powerful that suit of armor had been just now. Fearful, he remained standing where he was. After a long while, the bearded man said with a face full of shock and doubt, "Stark. He actually pulled off so many tricks right under my nose. That lord will definitely blame me." Ouch! At that moment, Wells also patted the dust off his clothes and quickly stood up from the ground. Tony Stark's flamethrower had struck Mora and Wells head-on earlier. Mora had been burned to death on the spot, while Wells had merely put on an act, rolling across the ground twice. Only after seeing that almost everyone had left did Wells finally get back up. Bastard. Seeing Wells calmly patting the dust off his body as if nothing had happened, the bearded man roared angrily, "Why aren't you hurrying to bring Tony Stark back?" Hearing the bearded man's voice, Wells looked around. Seeing that there were no outsiders nearby, he asked uncertainly, "Are you talking to me? You son of a bitch." Seeing the confusion in Wells's eyes, the bearded man finally exploded at this moment. "I'm talking to you. Sorry." A cold gleam flashed through Wells's eyes. He reached out with his right hand and pulled through the air. The bearded man's body seemed to lose control. Wells grabbed the bearded man by the neck and lifted him high into the air. Wells said calmly, "You don't have the ability to order me around." Ugh! The bearded man's feet left the ground, and a wave of suffocation surged into his chest. At this moment, he could already feel death approaching. Smack! Wells slammed the bearded man hard onto the ground, then asked, "Do you have any connection to Hydra?" Because the bearded man had kept mentioning that lord earlier, Wells felt there should be someone behind him. Someone who dared to kidnap Tony Stark definitely could not be an ordinary figure. Wells guessed that perhaps this was another conspiracy stirred up by Hydra. What Hydra? After the bearded man caught his breath, he said with a face full of suspicion. "I've been in the Ten Rings for so long, and I've never heard anything about Hydra. Was I overthinking it?" Wells asked himself inwardly. At this moment, Wells's spiritual power had already sensed that Tony Stark had fought his way out of the camp. He no longer asked any more questions and muttered to himself, "This place is filled with filth. Magic should kill everyone here." After he finished speaking, the aura of magic around Wells swelled, and endless flames began rising from the ground. Ah! Ah! Miserable screams rang out from within the camp. Several soldiers were quickly engulfed by scarlet flames. What's going on? Noticing that only a few soldiers had died, Wells frowned. Why can't my magic unleash its power here? With Wells's strength, any casual spell should have been enough to turn this desert into an endless sea of fire, not merely burn a few soldiers to death. Strange. Wells said in a deep voice, "There's something strange about this camp." Seeing flames rising from the ground, the bearded man hurriedly patted himself down, terrified that the flames would touch him. Humph! Wells snorted softly, and the flames on the ground instantly vanished. Wells stomped heavily on the earth, and an extremely orderly crack leading into a cave appeared in his sight. "Let's go!" Wells grabbed the bearded man with his right hand and jumped straight into the cave. "I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there." The bearded man seemed to know where he was being taken. He kept twisting his body, trying to break free from Wells's control. "Quiet." Wells's voice rang in the bearded man's ears like thunder. In the next second, he no longer dared resist and could only obediently fall downward with Wells. About half a minute later, Wells and the bearded man finally reached the deepest point. A pitch-black corridor appeared before them. Without hesitation, Wells dragged the bearded man and continued forward. At the end of the corridor was a dim little room. Inside was a lamp emitting green light, while on the walls of this room were dozens of photographs of people. Wells swept his gaze over them and discovered that Tony Stark was impressively among them. Aside from him, Wells also saw a familiar name, Hank Pym, the researcher of the Ant-Man suit. At this moment, Wells finally found the similarity among the people in these photographs. Almost all of them were scientists. Or perhaps, to be more direct, most of them were war scientists. The fields they researched could mostly serve warfare. An honored guest has arrived. The Ten Rings failed to welcome you from afar. I hope you will forgive our discourtesy. At some point, a figure draped in a black robe walked out from the darkness. This person's voice was extremely hoarse, making it very difficult for outsiders to determine their gender from it. Mandarin. Seeing this black-robed figure, the bearded man seemed to have found his backbone. He shouted at the black-robed figure, "Mandarin, this has nothing to do with me. This person found this place on his own." The black-robed person called Mandarin by the bearded man slowly looked toward him and said, "You couldn't even keep watch over one Tony Stark. What use is there in keeping you?" Mandarin. The bearded man's face turned pale. He said anxiously, "Mandarin, listen to my explanation. Go." The Mandarin waved his hand, and the green light that had originally stood on the wall flew onto the bearded man with a whoosh. In an instant, endless flames surged over the bearded man's body. He did not even have time to scream before he was directly reduced to ashes. Magic? This black-robed person could actually use magic too. The expression on Wells's face was as if he had discovered a new continent. The Mandarin laughed loudly. I have embarrassed myself before our honored guest. Playing tricks? Wells snorted coldly. Then his body shot toward the black-robed person like an arrow. On Earth, there were very few opponents who could make Wells feel wary. Although he did not know the exact origin of this black-robed person, Wells would absolutely not fear him. So fast. Seeing Wells's figure, the black-robed person could not help being shocked inwardly. However, he did not choose to confront Wells head-on. He turned sideways and took advantage of the movement to dodge Leon's attack. Oh? Seeing that his strike had failed, Wells smiled. I didn't expect you to know some fighting techniques too. Mage was a noble profession. Generally, they did not practice combat techniques, because they were more willing to spend their time studying magic. However, Wells still did not take this person seriously. His right hand changed from palm to claw, and with lightning-like speed, he tore the black robe from this mandarin's body. What appeared beneath the black robe was beyond Wells's expectations. It was actually an extremely young face. He was at most around 25 years old. Perhaps because he had not been exposed to light for a long time, his face was somewhat pale. Who exactly are you? Wells questioned this young man. What exactly are you people trying to do? Wells did not regard this young man as the Mandarin. The true Mandarin was probably someone else. Someone who makes a fortune from war. The man said faintly, naturally, I don't want war to stop. So? Wells replied without the slightest politeness, you kidnapped weapons scientists from around the world because you want to research even more powerful killing weapons? The man said with a smile, that is my idea. As for the true thoughts of my master, the Mandarin, I have no way of knowing. Boom! As the man spoke, taking advantage of Wells's lack of defense, he released a brilliant spell from his hand. Freeze! Seeing this, Wells narrowed his eyes. An innate aura belonging to an unrivaled powerhouse spread from his body. In an instant, the spell released by the young man vanished completely without a trace. This man's magical attainments were far inferior to those of the Sorcerer Supreme's lineage. Dealing with ordinary people was naturally not a problem. But if he wanted to fight a powerhouse like Wells, then his death would be far too miserable. What? The young man cried out in shock. How is that possible? At the same time, Wells also sensed something was wrong. Feeling the lingering afterglow of magic in the air, Wells revealed a thoughtful expression. You probably aren't a mage. The magic on your body seems to have been granted to you by someone else. Just like the divine blessings of Wells and Odin, the magic on this young man's body had also been bestowed upon him by another powerful being. Ron. The young man's expression changed. At this moment, he no longer had any will to resist and hurriedly fled outward. But how could Wells allow him to do as he wished? With a teleport, he arrived directly in front of the young man. Seeing that he could neither win nor escape, the young man quickly opened his mouth and said, all my magic comes from my master, the Mandarin. Everything here was done behind his back. He has 10 magic rings in his possession. I heard they are extremely powerful. Traitor! A furious voice abruptly rang in the young man's mind. The color drained from the young man's face. He shouted in fear and panic, Master, spare me. Master, spare me. Ah! Ah! The young man's entire body convulsed, and he rolled on the ground in agony. Wells hurriedly lowered himself to inspect the young man's body, but at that moment, the young man's eyes went black, and he stopped struggling. Wells muttered to himself, this Mandarin is ruthless. He even killed his own disciple. Number 48. Someone waiting for you to come home. Phew. In the endless desert, Tony Stark saw that he had already shaken off the 10 Rings pursuers. He took off his helmet and greedily sucked in a breath of air. No. Looking at the desert around him, Tony gritted his teeth and said, I can't collapse here. This place is still too close to their camp. They might still catch up. Tony knew he had not escaped danger yet. Those 10 Rings soldiers were definitely still searching for him. His current situation was still extremely dangerous. Besides, even if those people did not catch up, in this desert, without enough water and food, he would not survive. Boom! Suddenly, an ear-piercing roar sounded. Immediately after, a massive helicopter appeared in Tony Stark's eyes. Tony was the president of Stark Industries, and his company also manufactured aircraft, missiles, and other large-scale weapons for this country. Because of that, Tony recognized at a glance that this aircraft was a model that had been retired many years ago. But when he saw it, it was as if he had seen an unparalleled beauty. Tony shouted, "Help! Help! Quick!" On the aircraft, Wells smiled knowingly, then said to the pilot, "Lower the rescue ladder and bring Tony Stark up." After that magical boy died, Wells boarded the aircraft and began searching the desert for Tony Stark's figure. Although Wells had not come into direct contact with that Mandarin, seeing how cleanly he killed his own disciple, Wells knew this Mandarin was also a ruthless person. However, Wells did not take this Mandarin to heart. No matter how powerful this person was, he was still not qualified to be Wells's opponent right now. "I'm finally saved." At that moment, Tony Stark finally let out a breath of relief. As if all the strength had drained from his body, he collapsed directly onto the desert. In the original story, after Tony escaped the terrorists' lair, he boarded a rescue aircraft from the military. But this time, Wells had cut in first. An aircraft was not something ordinary people could obtain. In order to get this helicopter, Wells had spent quite some effort. He had Dracula spend a large amount of money to buy a retired combat helicopter from an arms dealer. Although it looked rather worn out, all its functions were still very good. More than 10 minutes later, Tony Stark finally arrived aboard the helicopter. He took off the armor on his body, but his face still looked as if he had yet to recover from the shock. Wells carefully sized up Tony Stark's armor. Unlike the later suits, Tony's first-generation armor was only a shell of iron. However, it held extraordinary meaning. The first-generation armor had also laid the foundation for the later steel armors. Little Tony. Looking at Tony Stark's handsome and carefree face, Wells smiled slightly. "Do you still remember me?" In appearance, Tony Stark had inherited his mother's beauty. At his current age, he was handsome and elegant, a true elite among men, radiating the aura of a domineering CEO through and through. "You are." Tony Stark looked carefully at Wells. His brows furrowed tightly, and for a moment, he actually failed to recognize him. Wells was not angry. After all, he had disappeared for more than 30 years. To mortals, that was a long stretch of time. "You?" Suddenly, a figure in Tony Stark's mind overlapped with Wells's appearance. He asked in disbelief, "You're Mr. Wells?" Tony Stark's face was filled with shock. "After so many years, why hasn't your appearance changed at all? You're much smarter than your mother." Wells had not deliberately altered his face. He knew that even if he said nothing, with Tony Stark's mind, it would not take long for him to recognize him on his own. Wells had long expected this. "I'll explain that question to you later." Wells said in a deep voice, "Right now, let's go home first." Longevity did not mean immortality. At present, this question was still far too unbelievable for Tony Stark. But in a few more years, all of these questions would be easily resolved. In the future, Captain America would sleep in the ice for 70 years and emerge safe and sound. Thor would also descend to the earthly realm in the form of the God of Thunder. The times would change drastically. Wells's unchanged appearance after 30 years would not be considered anything major. Of course, if Tony Stark insisted on forcing an answer, Wells also had a way to deal with it. He would attribute everything to genes. Wells would tell Tony Stark that he had participated in an experiment identical to Captain America's, and the genes in his body had been altered as a result. Tony. Seeing her son return safely, Mrs. Howard burst into old tears. "Mr. Wells, thank you so much." Wells said indifferently, "It's nothing, Mrs. Howard. Back then, little Tony grew up under my watch. How could I just watch him fall into danger? There was a saying, adding flowers to brocade could never compare to sending charcoal in the snow. Wells believed that after today, his relationship with the Stark family would rise sharply. Immediately after, Wells turned around and affectionately patted Tony Stark's shoulder. "Go back and spend some time with your mother. You're not young anymore. Don't let your mother worry about you every day." Wells moved one step forward. Leaning beside Tony Stark's ear, he said in an extremely low voice, "Investigate the people around you carefully. This kidnapping was not simple." Having said that, Wells said no more. He exchanged a few polite words with Mrs. Howard, then turned and left. Hearing Wells's words, Tony Stark's expression became dazed for a moment. When he was in the desert, he had already noticed this matter. The weapons held by those 10 ringed soldiers had clearly been manufactured by Stark Industries. This meant there was someone inside the company colluding with outsiders. Perhaps, even his kidnapping was part of someone's plan. Thinking of this, Stark's gaze became colder and colder. Wells directly pushed open the door of his villa. But unlike before, this time, Wells heard a pleasantly surprised voice. "You're back." Wells had not been gone for very long, only 7 or 8 short days. But it seemed as if the house had undergone earth-shaking changes. 3 pots of fresh flowers had been placed on the balcony. The house was filled with a rich fragrance, and the chairs and stools seemed to have been carefully arranged. At a glance, the interior looked extremely clean and bright. Seeing Wells walk in, Hannah said with a face full of joy, "I thought you would need a few more days before coming back. Someone was waiting for you to come home." "How nice." Hearing Hannah's words, all of Wells's exhaustion vanished. If the future situation were not so grim, perhaps Wells would choose another kind of life, wife, children, and a warm home. "I'm hungry." Wells smiled sincerely at Hannah. "I want to eat your best dish." After Wells said this, all the knots in his heart loosened. His attitude toward Hannah also changed somewhat. "All right." A trace of surprise appeared in Hannah's eyes. Her brows curved with a smile, making her look like a blooming peony. "Wait a little. I'll go cook for you right now." Number 49. Meeting. More than 10 days later, Tony Stark stood inside a television station and said to the camera, "I am Iron Man." The reporters below instantly exploded into chaos, while the military personnel stared at Tony Stark, dumbfounded. Smack! Wells turned off the television with a smile on his face and muttered to himself, "Tony Stark still ended up taking this step." After Wells brought Tony Stark back from the desert, he no longer paid attention to Tony Stark's affairs. However, the story that followed still unfolded according to the main storyline. Tony Stark found out who the traitor in his company was. The two of them controlled their armor and fought a life-and-death battle. In the end, because of the flight altitude limit of the first-generation armor, Tony Stark emerged victorious. However, the commotion caused by the 2 combat robots was simply too great. Many civilians had seen them as well. To cover up the truth, the military specially held a press conference for Tony Stark. However, the military still did not understand Tony Stark. He had never been a low-key person. Besides, no one could control him, not even the military. And so, the scene Wells had just watched happened. "Why are you smiling so happily?" At that moment, Hannah walked out of the kitchen carrying a plate of fruit. Hannah had been on Earth for some time now. After this period of adjustment, she seemed to have gotten used to life on Earth. Sometimes, she would even take the initiative to ask Wells to accompany her shopping. When they went shopping, it was as if she had released the natural instincts a girl should have. Wells was very happy about this. "Nothing." Wells took the peeled apple from Hannah's hand. While chewing, he said, "Hannah, I forgot to ask before. How is my mother's health?" Speaking of this matter, Wells felt quite ashamed. After all, he was the one who had run away from the wedding first and, without reason, failed to live up to his mother's expectations. "Mother?" Hannah said with a sweet smile, "Mother is in very good health." Cough, cough. Hearing Hannah also call her mother, the apple in Wells's mouth immediately got stuck in his throat. Seeing this, Hannah quickly handed Wells a cup of water. "Gulp, Gulp. Wells boldly drank it all in one go, and only then did the piece of apple stuck in his throat go down into his stomach. Hannah had once presided over the affairs of the elven race in place of the Great Elder. She was an extremely intelligent person, so she immediately understood Wells's feelings. Hannah smoothed the hem of her skirt, then sat down beside Wells. Her face flushed red as she lowered her head and said, "Actually, the reason I came to Earth was Mother's idea. What she meant was that since you didn't want to hold the wedding, then we simply won't hold it. In any case, she can still live for a while longer. She should be able to see the birth of our child." He. Wells did not know how to respond and could only laugh dryly. Although Hannah lived here now, Wells swore to the heavens that he had absolutely never touched her. The relationship between the two of them was even whiter than paper. Hannah became restless. With a shy face, she ran back toward the kitchen. "I'll make you some more food." Seeing Hannah leave, Wells finally let out a sigh of relief. Bang! Bang! Before long, knocking suddenly came from outside the door. Wells stood up and walked out. He saw a blonde, blue-eyed woman with a graceful figure and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses standing outside. Looking at this beauty, Wells's heart skipped a beat, and he carefully sized her up. She was around 1.68 meters in height. Her long hair was tied up, and her features were delicate. There was no excess flesh anywhere on her body. Her face was pure, and her skin was enticing. She wore an ordinary office lady uniform. However, that slender waist looked extremely tempting. "Are you Mr. Wells?" The blonde, blue-eyed woman adjusted the glasses on the bridge of her nose. "I'm a real estate agent nearby. May I ask if you wish to sell your villa? A buyer is willing to pay 10 times the price. So I was overthinking it. They only want to buy my house." Hearing the woman's words, the worry in Wells's heart gradually disappeared. He smiled. "Sorry, I'm not short on money, and I don't intend to sell the house for now. However..." Wells changed the topic, and a somewhat strange smile appeared on his face. "Beautiful lady, may I invite you to dinner tonight? A beauty like you shouldn't have to show your face in public." Wells's eyes stared at the woman's ample chest, looking as if he were about to see through her. "No need. I'm a little busy today." The woman seemed long used to Wells's gaze. She smiled slightly, full of charm. "Then I won't disturb you any further, Mr. Wells." After speaking, the woman turned and left the entrance of Wells's villa. Looking at her back, Wells put away the smile on his face. This woman is much prettier than in the movies. Truly soul-stirring. After the woman left Wells's villa, she directly got into a black sedan. Inside the car, a one-eyed man seemed to have been waiting for a long time. Seeing the woman get into the car, the one-eyed man said slowly, "Romanoff, how did it go?" The woman removed her glasses, her face somewhat displeased. "Fury, I didn't notice anything wrong with that man just now. Are we buying this man's house just to monitor Stark?" "No." The one-eyed man shook his head. He took a photo from his pocket, and the person in the photo was none other than Wells. The one-eyed man's eye was sharp and bright. He stared meticulously at Wells in the photograph. "There's something wrong with this man. Although I have no evidence, my many years of experience as an agent tell me that this man absolutely has some unspeakable secret." Ring, ring, ring. The phone in the one-eyed man's arms suddenly rang. The one-eyed man put down the photo in his hand and immediately answered the phone. A deep and gentle voice came from the call. "Nick Fury, don't touch that person. We can't afford to provoke him." "Secretary General Goof, what happened?" Beep, beep. But the other end of the call had already hung up, leaving Nick Fury frozen in place. The woman said, "Director Nick Fury, what happened?" "Nothing." Nick Fury shook his head. "Romanoff, we can't investigate this person anymore. I'll forge an identity for you. Go to Tony Stark's side and monitor his movements." The woman nodded in agreement. "Yes." Night covered the sky. Just as Wells and Groot were watching television inside the house, a black shadow slipped into Wells's villa. "Looks like a little mouse has broken in." Wells and Groot exchanged a glance, both of them wearing playful expressions. A thief had actually come to their place. This was truly someone barging into the King of Hell's palace on his own. Whoosh! Wells's body disappeared from the sofa. Without making a sound, he arrived behind the thief and said calmly, "There isn't anything valuable here." As he spoke, Wells stretched out his right leg and kicked that person in the butt. Ouch! That person let out a scream, then fell to the ground. "Oh?" Hearing that somewhat familiar voice, Wells cried out in surprise. He reached out and turned on the light, then looked toward the person on the floor. Goof? The man on the floor was precisely Goof, whom he had not seen for a long time. However, compared to back then, he was much older now. His temples were white, and Wells almost failed to recognize him. Goof rubbed his butt, then climbed up from the floor. Looking at Wells, who still looked the same as he had back then, a trace of hope appeared on Goof's face. At his age, fame, wealth, and status no longer held any attraction for him. The words Wells had once said, "I can let you live a few more decades," now seemed to possess magic. "Big bro," Goof said with a full smile, "it has been a long time. You're still as young as ever." Wells blinked. "Goof, you're not dead yet?" To be honest, Wells had almost forgotten about Goof by now. This was a chess piece he had arranged in Hydra back then. In order to let this man climb to a higher position, he had even deliberately revealed information about the cosmic cube to Goof. Goof rubbed his hands together, the joy on his face impossible to suppress. "Thanks to Big Bro's blessing back then, my body hasn't had any problems all these years. I feel like I can keep living for another 10 years. Now that Big Bro has returned, I can serve you loyally at your side." Being called Big Bro again and again by an old man made Wells feel extremely strange. However, he was still very happy that Goof had taken the initiative to come find him. After all, Marvel's main storyline had already begun. Wells needed someone to provide him with intelligence. "What position have you reached in Hydra?" Wells sat on the sofa and said slowly, "I don't keep useless people. If you can't be of use to me, then don't contact me anymore. We'll part on good terms." Hearing that his god was about to abandon him, Goof quickly said, "Big Bro, Hydra has already reformulated its plans internally. It has now taken root within S.H.I.E.L.D., and I am S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Secretary General, directly responsible for supervising the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury." "What?" Hearing Goof's words, Wells could not help looking at him a few more times. As a member of Hydra, he had actually managed to thrive within S.H.I.E.L.D. It seemed this Goof was also a talented person. Back then, Wells had almost misjudged him. Wells muttered to Goof, "I didn't expect you to actually be even more impressive than Nick Fury. I really underestimated you back then." "Heh." Goof breathed a sigh of relief inwardly, then said humbly, "Nick Fury is also a troublesome figure. All of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s agents are under his command. Over the years, we Secretaries General haven't had any way to deal with him either." Number 50. Two Doctors, Part 1. "Of course." Wells nodded with deep feeling. "That's Nick Fury, after all." In the Avengers, Nick Fury was an extremely special person. He was neither someone modified by superpowers, nor did he possess any extraordinary abilities. And yet, later on, the superheroes within the Avengers all trusted him quite a bit. In the Avengers, Nick Fury was like a strategist who planned everything from behind the scenes. Even in this universe, Nick Fury was one of the very few people filled with wisdom. He was also the one who advocated forming the Avengers. Without him, all those people with superpowers and divine abilities would merely be a scattered mess. Right? Thinking of what had happened today, Wells asked Rolf, "Why did Black Widow set her sights on me today? Is S.H.I.E.L.D. secretly investigating me?" That blonde, blue-eyed woman today was none other than the famous Black Widow. Although she hid herself extremely well, she could not hide from Wells's eyes. "It seems to be Nick Fury's order." Goof stood straight beside Wells, like a subordinate reporting his work. Hearing Wells's words, Goof replied apologetically, "I've already called Nick Fury for them. I believe he won't disturb you again in the future." Goof's posture was extremely humble, not looking like the Secretary General of S.H.I.E.L.D. at all. Wells nodded. "That's good. I don't like being watched." Because Hannah was currently in the earthly realm, Wells had a few more concerns. He was afraid the powerful enemies he provoked might harm Hannah. Unless it was absolutely unavoidable, he did not want Hannah to get involved in the future war. Wells continued asking, "Does S.H.I.E.L.D. have any plans recently?" "I don't know the specifics." Afraid that Wells would misunderstand, Goof added, "Because of different divisions of work and responsibilities, I'm only responsible for supervising Nick Fury. Administrative matters are all planned by Nick Fury." Wells stared into Goof's eyes. "Tell me some information I'd be interested in." Wells did not want to have a long discussion with Goof. He did not care at all who the true boss of S.H.I.E.L.D. was. "Sorry, Big Brother." Goof immediately closed his mouth, his mind turning rapidly. Nick Fury seems to be monitoring Tony Stark. Also, for some unknown reason, Dr. Banner has appeared in this city. In a few days, the military seems to have an operation targeting him. Because the military is not under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s jurisdiction, I only just learned this news as well. Dr. Banner? The Hulk? The military was actually hunting the Hulk. Had they gone insane? Hearing this, Wells immediately sat up from the sofa. "When?" Goof answered respectfully, "It seems to be 3 days later, in an open space on the outskirts." "Is it starting?" Hannah held popcorn, melon seeds, and other snacks in both hands, her face full of anticipation. "Is it starting?" Wells said irritably, "Not yet." Originally, Wells had not planned to bring Hannah along. But for some unknown reason, she had overheard the conversation between Wells and Groot, then insisted on coming no matter what. Unable to withstand Hannah's coquettish pestering, Wells reluctantly brought her out. Nowadays, internet technology was developing rapidly. News of the Hulk had already spread throughout the entire country some time ago. In Hannah's eyes, the military hunting the Hulk was far more exciting than any science fiction blockbuster. Suddenly, Wells seemed to sense something. His mind tensed at once. They've made their move. Ah! Accompanied by a roar full of beast-like fury, 5 or 6 tanks advanced in orderly formation toward the dilapidated house ahead. Seeing those tanks, Wells muttered to himself, "The military really spent big this time." Whoosh! A green figure charged forward violently, rushing out of the house at high speed. Like a spring, he leapt into the sky, then descended from above and landed directly on top of a tank. That indestructible tank was instantly turned into a pile of scrap metal. So terrifying. Seeing this scene, Hannah's face turned pale, and she immediately tried to burrow into Wells's arms. Seeing this, Wells wrapped an arm around her and comfortingly patted Hannah. It's fine. Groot and I will protect you." Hannah nodded happily, as if her little scheme had succeeded. I know you'll protect me." Feeling Wells's scent, Hannah's face turned as rosy as if she were drunk. "This Hulk." Wells did not notice anything strange about Hannah. Looking at the Hulk not far away, who was like a god descending to the world, Wells asked Groot, "Can you defeat him?" Groot had followed Wells in battle for many years, and his strength was also extremely formidable. However, after hearing Wells's question at this moment, he hesitated. "Right now, he isn't my match, but... Wells frowned tightly, his face somewhat confused. Groot opened his mouth. "This person's strength seems capable of increasing. I feel that his current state is not yet his peak." Boom! Another rumble rang out. Wells and the others looked up and discovered that a combat helicopter had already flown toward the Hulk. The Hulk raised his head and roared. He lifted a damaged tank from the ground, spun his body once, then hurled it straight at the combat aircraft. Thud! The Hulk struck the aircraft perfectly. The plane that the military had placed great hopes in became like a kite with its string cut, carrying dazzling sparks as it rapidly crashed toward the ground. Retreat! Retreat! The military personnel shouted through loudspeakers, fall back immediately. Once he returns to human form, we'll capture him again. After saying that, the military personnel slowly withdrew. He. Seeing this scene, Wells shook his head disdainfully. Hunters often appeared in the form of prey. In this hunting operation, who exactly was the hunter? Seeing the enemy retreating, the Hulk's face turned fierce. He was about to chase after them, but for some reason, he suddenly looked toward the place where Wells was hiding. Not good. Wells and the Hulk stared at each other from afar. He quickly pushed Hannah out of his arms, and his body shot forward at extreme speed. Two powerful auras surged into the sky. The Hulk retreated several hundred meters in succession, while Wells stood unmoving in his original spot. Seeing this, Wells shouted at the Hulk, "Big guy, we're just passing by. We have no hostility." Ah! After clashing palms with Wells head-on, the Hulk still seemed not to have recovered from the impact. After hearing Wells's words, the aura around his body became violent again, like a maddened beast. "This guy." Wells muttered softly. In only a single exchange, the Hulk's strength had actually increased several times over. This ability to have his power skyrocket in a straight line as his anger increased was simply a bug. No. I can't drag this out. Wells immediately came up with a plan in his heart. I have to subdue him quickly. Wells stretched his body, and the aura on him erupted in an instant. As someone with tens of thousands of years of life, Wells naturally would not fear the Hulk. Since the Hulk would not listen to his persuasion, then he would beat him into submission. Wells charged toward the Hulk like thunder, and the Hulk also refused to show weakness, clashing with Wells once again. The Hulk's strength was powerful, but his speed clearly could not keep up with the growth of his power. Wells did not choose to confront him directly. Using his advantage in speed, he frantically struck the Hulk's vital points. Ah! Seeing that he could not even touch Wells's body, the Hulk finally became enraged and roared again. Shut up! Seizing this opportunity, Wells arrived in front of the Hulk and punched him hard in the chin. Clang! The Hulk's body tilted, losing his balance then and there. He staggered and fell to the ground. Whoosh! Groot arrived beside Wells. Thick vines immediately grew from the ground. Under Groot's control, the vines quickly wrapped the Hulk into the shape of a mummy. Ah! The Hulk used all his strength to struggle free, but no matter how hard he tried, the vines bound him like shackles. This is a beast. Groot looked at the Hulk and frowned. Like a beast that hasn't successfully evolved yet. Sigh. Wells sighed. Actually, he's also a pitiful person. The Hulk's true identity was Dr. Banner. He possessed several degrees and was truly a favored son of heaven. If not for the gamma rays, he might have become a leader in a certain scientific field. But with the appearance of the Hulk, he could now only live a life of hiding from place to place. I can try. At some point, Hannah had also arrived beside Wells. Looking at the Hulk, who was still struggling continuously, pity appeared in her eyes. She slowly walked to the Hulk's side and stretched out her right hand, intending to stroke his head. Wells's expression changed, and he shouted, "Don't." One had to know that the Hulk at this moment was a crazed beast. He might tear Hannah's arm off. It's fine. You don't need to worry. Hannah gave Wells a sweet smile, and a gentle white light appeared on her right hand. Hannah looked at the Hulk gently and said, "We won't hurt you. I promise." The Hulk bared his teeth at Hannah, but when he met her sincere eyes, the ferocity in his own gaze grew fainter and fainter. Wells cried out in surprise. I understand. Groot seemed to remember something. Miss Hannah is a spirit born from heaven and earth. She lived among the elves for hundreds of years, and the elves are also a race that dislikes conflict. Before Groot could finish speaking, Wells said as if he half understood, an innately pure and flawless spiritual body, combined with her environment after birth, so she can influence and pacify the Hulk. Number 51. The Two Doctors, Part 2. Groot nodded heavily. That's pretty much what it means. Miss Hannah was born with a spirit body. All living creatures naturally love being around her. Groot smiled mysteriously and lowered his voice. I heard that if you stay around someone like her, your magical cultivation will improve. Later, when the two of you sleep together and have some friendly exchanges every night, your magic will definitely. Wells jabbed Groot in the side with his elbow and cursed under his breath, Did I teach you all this nonsense? Even so, Wells's expression became somewhat unnatural. He cautiously glanced toward Hannah. Seeing that Hannah was still comforting the Hulk, Wells secretly let out a sigh of relief. To Wells's surprise, the Hulk did not revert to his human form immediately. After calming down, he looked pitifully at Hannah and complained, Hulk never wanted to kill anyone. But those people all treat Hulk like a monster. They all want to kill Hulk. Wells muttered to himself, is this the true power of a spirit body? After the Avengers were formed in the future, among all the Avengers, only Black Widow was able to calm the Hulk. However, Black Widow merely awakened Dr. Banner's consciousness within the Hulk. Hannah, on the other hand, could communicate with the Hulk directly and soothe him. She was far superior to Black Widow in that regard. Hearing Hulk's words, Hannah's heart ached. Although this monster possessed overwhelming strength, his mentality was probably only that of a child a few years old. She gently stroked Hulk's head and softly said, Go to sleep. Everything will be better after you wake up. Okay. Hulk is the most obedient. Hulk nodded obediently. Then he tilted his head and immediately fell into a deep sleep. At that moment, the Hulk's enormous body slowly shrank, gradually returning to the form of an ordinary human. Ha ha ha. Wells walked forward a few steps. Looking at Dr. Banner, who had returned to normal, he smiled. Interesting. This is really interesting. Groot examined Dr. Banner's body, but the moment he did, he was shocked. Looking at Wells, he said, You hit him far too hard just now. He has multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and severe injuries. If he isn't treated immediately, his life could be in danger. Didn't you see the situation just now? Wells rolled his eyes at Groot. If I hadn't acted when I did, who could have guaranteed that he wouldn't have gone berserk again? Once the Hulk became enraged, his strength would continue increasing. Wells had no intention of dragging out a prolonged battle against him. That was why he had chosen to end the fight as quickly as possible, repeatedly targeting the Hulk's vital points. His final punch had landed directly on the Hulk's head. His nervous system had probably suffered injuries as well. Hannah looked worried. We should hurry and take him to the hospital. All right. Wells nodded in agreement. Although the three of them could use magic to ease Banner's pain, none of them knew how to set broken bones or treat internal injuries. For someone in Banner's condition, Wells felt that a hospital was still the best choice. All right then. Since things had already come to this, Groot lifted Dr. Banner onto his shoulder and ran toward the city. Before long, Wells and the others arrived at the nearest hospital as quickly as possible. Doctor! Doctor! Someone, save him! Along the way, Dr. Banner's breathing had grown weaker and weaker, greatly alarming Wells. The Hulk would become one of the Avengers' most important combat forces in the future, one of its 6 founding members. If Wells accidentally beat him to death, then what Avengers would there even be? A man in a white lab coat wearing a surgical mask quickly came out. He examined Dr. Banner with a stethoscope, and his expression grew increasingly grave. How did he end up with injuries this severe? As he spoke, the doctor glanced at Wells with a questioning look. Wells casually made something up. We were just in a car accident. However, when Wells noticed the name tag on the doctor's chest, he froze. Why was this man here? A car accident? The doctor looked deeply puzzled. He has multiple internal injuries. These aren't injuries that would normally result from a car accident. Forget it. The doctor raised his voice. Nurses, prepare the operating room immediately. Call Dr. Rancher from orthopedics as well. This patient needs emergency treatment. Half a minute later, several nurses hurried over. Yes, Dr. Strange. The nurses wheeled Dr. Banner into the operating room. Only then did Hannah finally breathe a sigh of relief. She turned to look at Wells. Seeing the complicated expression on his face, she asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" "You don't have to worry about the big guy. I believe he'll be fine." She thought Wells was simply worried about the Hulk. "Oh." Wells snapped out of his daze and explained to Hannah, "I'm fine. Don't worry." At that moment, one of the nurses was hurrying toward the operating room. Wells quickly stopped her. "Excuse me. May I ask what the name of that doctor in the white coat is?" The nurse was startled at first by being stopped, but after hearing the question, she quickly answered. "Oh, you mean Dr. Stephen Strange. He's a specialist. He's a friend of our hospital director, so the director invited him here to help for a few months. Don't worry. As long as Dr. Stephen Strange is handling the case, nothing will go wrong." "So it really is him." Hearing the nurse's answer, Wells's eyes flickered. Stephen Strange, the future Doctor Strange and the future Sorcerer Supreme of the Marvel Universe. Wells no longer stopped the nurse. He returned to his seat by the wall and murmured softly, "What a coincidence. I actually ran into two doctors today. Dr. Banner. Dr. Strange. Life really is full of surprises." An hour later, Dr. Banner's surgery was completed. Just as Wells had expected, Banner had successfully returned from death's doorstep. Whether it was because of the Hulk's incredible survival instincts or Dr. Stephen Strange's exceptional medical skills, Banner had escaped danger, and everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Let's go." Seeing that Banner was out of danger, Wells said to Groot and Hannah, "We should head back. I'll have the old bat arrange for someone to take care of him later. We don't need to worry about it ourselves." Hannah hesitated before speaking. "I want to bring him back with us. He's just too pitiful." Wells raised an eyebrow and remained silent for a long time. Hannah looked at him cautiously. "Can't we?" Looking into Hannah's eyes, Wells said softly, "It's not that we can't. It's just, in the Marvel Universe, no hero was truly the main character. Every hero had a mission of their own. That was one of the reasons Wells disliked interfering with Earth's affairs. Every superhero had their own journey of growth. Forcing himself into that journey might not necessarily benefit them. For example, when Tony Stark had been trapped in the desert a few days ago, Wells could easily have wiped out all of Tony's enemies himself. Instead, he chose to stand by and watch. Without those hardships, how could Tony Stark one day stand shoulder to shoulder with gods using nothing but the body of a mortal and a heart of steel? "If we don't keep him with us," Hannah said as she stepped closer, "who knows how many innocent people he might hurt in the future." Seeing that Wells was still hesitating, Hannah stood on tiptoe and gently kissed him on the lips. Then she took his hand and said in a spoiled tone, "Please. I'm actually the third wheel." Groot's face darkened. He stopped paying attention to the two of them and quietly walked away. Who could possibly withstand this? What kind of man could pass a test like this? Wells's heart trembled. Seeing Hannah still looking at him expectantly, he sighed. "All right. If he stays with us, then perhaps we'll also be saving some innocent lives." Hearing Wells's answer, Hannah's face immediately lit up with delight. "I knew you were the best. Hopefully nothing unexpected happens later." Seeing Hannah so happy also made Wells happy. However, beneath that happiness was a trace of worry. After all, he was now actively interfering with the course of the Marvel Universe. Wells silently encouraged himself. "Forget it. There have been kings who gave up entire kingdoms just to make a beauty smile. I'm only changing the fate of one hero. That's nothing." Several hours later, Dr. Banner finally woke up. Wells grabbed Banner's hand and said, "Dr. Banner, I'd like to invite you to stay at my home for a while." Banner was startled by Wells's enthusiasm. "And no. I don't need." "No." Wells directly interrupted him. "You do. Since he had already promised Hannah, Wells would not break his word. No matter what happened today, he was taking Dr. Banner home. How touching. The nurses nearby, completely unaware of the truth, had tears welling in their eyes. This is so touching. All right. Dr. Stephen Strange said to Wells, the patient is no longer in danger. He only needs a few more days of rest. I'll be leaving in a few days, but I'll brief the doctor who takes over. Wells smiled mysteriously. We'll definitely meet again. Number 52. The Dragon God's whereabouts. More than 10 days later, Dr. Banner recovered at an astonishing speed. Wells heard that the attending physician at the time had intended to apply for a world record, but in the end, because Dr. Banner refused to reveal his name, the doctor could only give up unwillingly. Sigh. Looking at the scenery outside the car window, Dr. Banner seemed somewhat depressed. Doctor? Wells smiled happily. Don't be so down. Give me a smile. At this moment, Wells and the others were on their way home, and this expensive car had also been sent over by the old bat. A few days ago, in order to make Dr. Banner agree to leave with him, Wells had used no small amount of coercion and temptation. Dr. Banner gave Wells a smile that looked even more painful than crying. Wells felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Dr. Banner's smile was truly too destructive to the mood. Wells lowered his voice and said, Doctor, I know you're a good person, but everyone is worried you might suddenly go berserk. Coming with me may not necessarily be a bad thing. Behind Wells stood Goof, the Secretary General of S.H.I.E.L.D., as well as the old bat, the underworld godfather of this city. In the future, as long as Dr. Banner did not go berserk, Wells had the confidence to hide Dr. Banner's identity so he would no longer need to live the same life of hiding everywhere. As long as he followed Wells, Wells could allow Dr. Banner to live like a normal person for a while. Dr. Banner clenched his fist, and a few traces of longing appeared on his face. I hope it goes as you wish. No one was willing to live a life of wandering and displacement. Dr. Banner had once been a respectable elite of society, but because of the gamma rays, he had fallen into being a monster everyone wanted to hunt and kill. His family had been destroyed. And his life was extremely tragic. Now, no one longed for a normal life more than him. We're going home. Seeing the atmosphere turn cold for a moment, Hannah clapped her hands and livened things up. The car drove very quickly. In only a little over 40 minutes, Wells and the others returned to the original villa. Although Dr. Banner had recovered, his body was still very weak. With Groot supporting him, he got out of the car with difficulty, while Wells and Hannah got out together. Your Highness Wells. Just as Wells was about to walk into the house, a tall man in a black suit, who seemed to have been waiting for a long time, saw Wells and his eyes lit up. Your Highness Wells, I've been looking for you for so long. The moment the man in the black suit spoke, the noble aura on his body instantly vanished. At this moment, he looked like an upstart who had suddenly made a fortune. Even with expensive clothes on, he could not hide the earthy smell on his body. You. Seeing this man in the black suit, Wells blinked. He thought for a long time, but still could not recall any memory of this person. This man in black was extremely handsome, but he had a wicked smiling face that made people instinctively want to slap him twice. The air was filled with the unique aura of a vicious beast. Wells immediately became as if facing a great enemy. Right after that, he actually sensed a trace of familiarity from that aura. Staring into the man in black's eyes, Wells finally remembered something. You're the Dark Dragon? The aura on the man in black was precisely the unique aura of the Dark Dragon. The Dark Dragon was a direct descendant of the dragon god Nidhogg. This domineering power was something no magical beast in the world could imitate. Yes. The Dark Dragon was very happy. Your Highness, your eyesight is truly excellent. You recognized this dragon with just one glance. Wells said modestly, mainly because of your temperament. That face that looked like it deserved a slap was also something outsiders could not imitate. Wells silently complained in his heart. Back then, Wells and the Dark Dragon had gotten to know each other beneath the Tree of Life. Tens of thousands of years ago, Wells had also invited him to participate in the final war of the Nine Realms. It was just that during the battle, this dragon had only cared about absorbing the head of that bone dragon from Hell's underworld. At most, he could only be considered to have shown his face. Even though Wells planned everything thoroughly, he had never expected to run into something like that. He had originally wanted the Dark Dragon to help, but in the end, he had actually given the Dark Dragon an opportunity instead. Hannah also sized up the Dark Elf, then said, "So you're the Dark Dragon. Grandfather Tree of Life often mentions you." The Dark Dragon raised a brow, then said fiercely, "That old man mentions me? He probably wishes I would die sooner. This guy is definitely the Dark Dragon. There's no mistake. If this were a novel, with that mouth alone, he wouldn't survive 2 chapters." Wells grinned and immediately smoothed things over. Come, let's go inside." As the Dark Dragon walked, he said, "Your Highness, I came this time to ask you for help." "No rush." Wells felt somewhat displeased in his heart, but he did not say it directly. He only said tactfully, Come. Let's talk while we walk." "What?" At the dining table, Wells cried out in shock. "You're saying the dragon god Nidhogg may still be alive?" The dragon god Nidhogg was a giant dragon beneath the World Tree. According to legend, it survived by gnawing on the branches of the World Tree and was an extremely ancient existence. If it were still alive, forget the 9 realms, the situation of the entire universe would have to change. "Your Highness," the Dark Dragon said weakly, "if it's alive, that's a good thing for me. You really don't need to look like the end of the world has arrived." Heh. At this moment, Wells also noticed that he had lost his composure. He smiled awkwardly. "Go on. Continue." To be honest, deep down, Wells did not want the dragon god Nidhogg to be alive. After all, Asgard now gave orders across the 9 realms. If Nidhogg appeared in the 9 realms in the future, Wells believed that with his elder brother's personality, he would absolutely not allow Nidhogg to live. A world-shaking battle would definitely be unavoidable. What exactly are they talking about? Dr. Banner looked at everyone holding their breath with solemn faces, and his heart could not help muttering. But this food is pretty good. It was rare for him to eat a full meal. Very quickly, Banner placed his attention on the dining table and stopped worrying about everyone else's affairs. The Dark Dragon slowly said, "Do you still remember when you asked me to help back then? How could I possibly forget? In that battle, not only did you not make a move, you even got a free feast." Wells smiled brightly. "Don't keep me in suspense. Just say it directly." The Dark Dragon continued, "The bone dragon you killed back then was very likely one of my ancestors when it was alive. While devouring it, I obtained a shocking piece of information from its memories. In the endless ages before this, that bone dragon once learned news about the dragon god Nidhogg from a certain being." Wells found the loophole. "In other words, you're not actually certain whether the dragon god Nidhogg is dead or alive." The Dark Dragon gritted his teeth and said, "I don't know, but someone does." "Who?" The Dark Dragon said in a deep voice, "Jormungandr. It is still alive. It was from its mouth that my bone dragon ancestor managed to learn news about the dragon god Nidhogg." Hannah's face turned pale. Her body trembled as she said, "The ancient magical beast, Jormungandr, she's still alive?" The ancient era was a period of extremely old history. Surtur was also known as an ancient demon god, but he was merely a flame creature who had luckily survived from ancient times until now. Among true ancient beasts and demon gods, Surtur was only a minor figure. And among the many ancient beasts, Jormungandr was absolutely in existence, ranked in the top 3. "That's right." The Dark Dragon's expression became solemn. "It is currently sleeping in Jotunheim. Some time ago, I fought it and suffered a crushing defeat. That is why, this time, I want to ask your Highness to act." Hearing the Dark Dragon's words, Wells's gaze flickered. He was no longer a hot-blooded youth. Jormungandr, who could defeat the Dark Dragon, did not even need to be thought about. It was definitely a super powerhouse. Jormungandr had already slept in Jotunheim for so many years. Since it had not disturbed Asgard's army, Wells believed there was no need for Asgard to provoke such an ancient beast. Your Highness. The dark dragon seemed to see Wells's hesitation. He said coldly, "You cannot refuse to act. When I was in Jotunheim, I discovered that the frost giants were worshipping Jormungandr. The two sides seem to have reached some kind of agreement. In the future, Jormungandr will definitely become Asgard's enemy. This is an unquestionable fact. You're courting death." Hearing the dark dragon's words, Wells slammed his palm heavily on the table. Does it really think this is still the ancient era? Old thing, the times have already changed. Jotunheim was Asgard's second subordinate land. It had been occupied slightly later than Nidavellir of the dwarves. However, unlike Nidavellir, Heimdall's resistance forces remained very stubborn to this day. After the golden bloodline of the giant race was eliminated by Asgard, the frost giant chieftain Laufey became the new leader of Jotunheim's resistance army. Tens of thousands of years had passed, yet he remained a thorn in Asgard's heart. However, Wells had never treated Laufey as an enemy. The reason he had not troubled Laufey all these years was only because he had left that opportunity to his eldest nephew, Thor. Wells said coldly, "Let's go. We're going to kill a snake." Number 53. Shocking news. Jotunheim, once the realm of the frost giants, had been rapidly developed by Asgard after its conquest. It had since become one of Asgard's major mining and resource territories. Ripples spread across the sky, and three figures appeared high above Jotunheim. Looking down at the land that now brimmed with life, the middle-aged man wearing a golden eye patch among the three said loudly, "Not bad. This place is far better than it was under the rule of the frost giants." Wells immediately chimed in with a shameless compliment. "That's all thanks to you, brother. Jormungandr, the ancient beast." To be safe, Wells had brought his elder brother, Odin, with him. After all, Laufey of the frost giants had allied himself with Jormungandr. Odin had every reason to intervene. Ha ha ha. Hearing his younger brother's praise, Odin was deeply pleased, and his laughter grew even louder. These two brothers really are something. Watching Wells and Odin sing each other's praises, the dark dragon curled its lips. It wanted to say something, but after remembering who they were, it immediately shut its mouth again. One was the ruler of the 9 realms. The other was the second most powerful figure in Asgard. Who would dare speak ill of them? The dark dragon grumbled inwardly. Seeing the dark dragon remain silent, Wells urged, "Let's go. Time to kill a snake." Originally, Groot and Dr. Banner had wanted to join this expedition. However, their opponent this time was Jormungandr, an ancient beast. Although Groot was battle-hardened, he was still lacking somewhat. As for Dr. Banner, Wells was afraid Jormungandr might beat the Hulk into permanent psychological trauma. If that affected Banner's future transformations, it would be a disaster. Right. The dark dragon snapped back to its senses, finally remembering the true purpose of this mission. "Follow me." After speaking, the dark dragon took the lead and shot forward. Odin and Wells exchanged a glance before following closely behind. 2 hours later, inside an unknown valley somewhere in Jotunheim, the dark dragon landed atop a low mountain. Looking at the uneven valley ahead, it shouted coldly, "Great serpent. I've returned. I told you before, I would come back." The valley remained deathly silent. No answer came. What a nuisance. Seeing this scene, Odin raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased. He extended one hand, releasing an overwhelming aura that shook the heavens. Then he made a simple gesture. Fall. Beyond Jotunheim, countless meteors drifting through the endless cosmos seemed to answer his command. One after another, they hurtled toward the realm. Boom! Crash! Massive meteors roared through the air before raining down upon the valley like a meteor shower. Towering mountains were instantly flattened, transforming into enormous bottomless craters. My brother has become even stronger. Witnessing the scene, Wells was inwardly shaken. Since the unification of the 9 realms, Odin had rarely fought personally. Now, Asgard's third generation, Thor and Loki, had become the center of attention. Many throughout the 9 realms had already forgotten the terror of being ruled by Odin. They believed he had grown old and senile, with only a few years left to live. But once Odin acted, his power still shook heaven and earth. "Who dares disturb me?" At that moment, a man clad in black armor arrived with a squad of soldiers. His body appeared somewhat slender, but his gaze was terrifying, as deep and dreadful as an endless abyss. "Lao Fei?" Seeing the newcomer, Odin smiled with amusement. "You actually dare appear before me openly." Lao Fei, ruler of the Frost Giants. Among all the troublemakers in Jotunheim over the years, he had caused the greatest disturbances. "Who dares interrupt my rest?" At the same time, an incomparably ancient voice echoed through the silent valley. It sounded as though it had traveled across the river of history itself. Within that voice, Wells actually sensed the power of time. This old monster has lived for who knows how many tens of thousands of years. Wells's expression grew increasingly grave. The ancient era had ended millions of years ago. Jormungandr might not have been the strongest ancient beast, but among all the ancient monsters and demon gods, it alone had survived until now. Jormungandr, a legendary beast from the primordial age. Lord Jormungandr has finally awakened. Hearing the voice from the valley, Lao Fei was overjoyed. With Lord Jormungandr supporting us, reclaiming Jotunheim is only a matter of time. As he spoke, he glanced toward Odin. The fate of the 9 realms now rested entirely upon Odin. If Odin died here today, chaos would erupt throughout the 9 realms. Every force opposing Asgard would immediately rise in rebellion. Lao Fei. Odin seemed to know exactly what the Frost Giant King was thinking. He smiled dismissively. "You should leave now. The battle that's about to begin isn't something you can contribute to." Lao Fei's face darkened, hatred flashing through his eyes. At that moment, he finally understood. Odin had never truly regarded him as an enemy. Even though Odin had every opportunity to kill him right now, he still hadn't bothered. Lao Fei glared viciously at Odin, as though trying to engrave his face into memory. But thinking of the battle that was about to unfold, he still gave the order. "We're leaving." Ha ha ha. Watching Lao Fei depart, Odin burst into hearty laughter. Rumble. Thunder roared endlessly across the heavens. The earth collapsed inward. Then, an enormous serpent thousands of meters long slowly rose from beneath the ground. Its head alone seemed larger than the sun itself. Its forked tongue flickered in and out, while an endless evil aura poured from its body, causing even Wells to feel a chill. In tens of thousands of years of battle, Wells had never encountered an enemy like this. It felt as though Jormungandr had devoured the lives of an entire age. Its aura of evil was simply horrifying. The dark dragon involuntarily shuddered. "Jormungandr, I've returned. Same as last time, I want to know what happened to the dragon god, Nidhogg." He he he. High above the sky, Jormungandr let out a piercing laugh. "You think you can force the truth about Nidhogg out of me? Die." It spat out a mouthful of green saliva. The putrid stench alone nearly caused Wells and the others to faint. "Move!" Wells shouted as he immediately dodged aside. Odin and the Dark Dragon were hardly fools. They also shot off in different directions. Sizzle! The green saliva possessed terrifying corrosive properties. The hill where the 3 had been standing emitted wisps of smoke before completely dissolving into a flat plain within seconds. That was close. Odin, Wells, and the Dark Dragon exchanged glances. All 3 saw shock in one another's eyes. As expected of an ancient beast. Just one mouthful of saliva possessed such destructive power. "Let's begin." Odin said gravely, "Its body is too massive. Its mobility is limited. That may be our opportunity." As soon as he finished speaking, a silver spear appeared in his hand. Without hesitation, Odin charged straight toward Jormungandr. Wells wasted no time either. He summoned the reality stone into his hand before joining the assault. The sky filled with endless roars. Boundless flames spread across the heavens. The dark dragon transformed into its true form. With a mighty beat of its wings and powerful magic surging around it, it charged directly at Jormungandr. Wells and Odin were both supreme powerhouses of the Nine Realms. Although the dark dragon was somewhat weaker than the two of them, what surprised Wells most was its savage style of combat against another ancient beast. The dark dragon attacked in the most primitive manner imaginable. It crazily bit into Jormungandr's flesh, tearing away chunks of meat with its jaws. Blood and flesh covered its mouth. The sight was horrifying. Veins bulged across Odin's arms as he hurled his silver spear with all his might. At the same time, Wells poured the full power of the reality stone into Odin's weapon. Whoosh! The silver spear blazed with overwhelming power as it pierced straight through Jormungandr's body. Roar! Feeling the agonizing pain tearing through its body, Jormungandr let out a furious roar. The spear continued driving deeper. It did not remain lodged inside the serpent. Instead, its overwhelming power blasted completely through. Jormungandr's enormous body, stretching thousands of meters, was instantly torn into two halves by Odin's attack. However, what shocked both Wells and Odin was that no blood flowed from the wound. Instead, sparks flew. Electrical wires protruded from the severed body. This. Wells's entire body trembled as he stared at the unbelievable scene. Only after half a minute did he turn toward Odin. "Brother, did you see it too?" "Yes." Odin's face turned ashen as he stared coldly at Jormungandr. The Celestials. This creature was modified by the Celestials. Although Jormungandr wore the body of a magical beast, its internal structure belonged to the exact same lineage as the low-grade machine sealed beneath the North Pole. Neither Odin nor Wells could possibly mistake it. The Celestials. Jormungandr roared wildly. "So, you actually know about the Celestials?" "Ha ha ha. Millions of years ago, they tried to remake me into one of their creations, but how could I ever submit? I am Jormungandr. I would never obey their commands." Then it turned toward the dark dragon. "Didn't you want to know what happened to the dragon god, Nidhogg? I'll tell you now." The dragon god Nidhogg fought together with the World Tree against members of the Celestials. In the end, they were mercilessly killed. Number 54. Shocking news too. What? Hearing Jormungandr's words, the dark dragon's face went blank. Only after a long while did it say in a trembling voice, "How could there still be someone in this world capable of killing the dragon god Nidhogg? It's impossible for such a powerful being to exist." Wells also sucked in a breath of cold air and silently thought, "Looks like I still underestimated the Celestials' strength." According to legend, the current 9 realms grew upon the World Tree. If the World Tree had consciousness, it would definitely be a heaven-defying powerhouse as well. Yet even such a majestic existence had died at the hands of the Celestials. Wells could imagine the scene of that great battle in his mind. If they had not encountered an undefeatable enemy, the World Tree and the dragon god Nidhogg, those two old enemies, would never have joined forces against a common foe. However, even with the World Tree and the dragon god Nidhogg working together, they had still been defeated by the Celestials. Jormungandr licked its lips and looked at Odin, Wells, and the dark dragon with incomparable greed. "Now, I have finally found a way to defeat the Celestials. As long as I devour the three of you, I believe I will absolutely possess power surpassing the Celestials." Swish. After speaking, Jormungandr's body continued shrinking. Before long, it turned into a person who seemed neither male nor female. It wore a silver skin-like covering, like a tight suit perfectly fitted to the lines of its body and bones. Jormungandr said in a low voice, "Come. Let us fight again." "This guy." Wells furrowed his brows tightly, and a faint worry rose in his heart. He could tell that Jormungandr was already extremely weak at this moment. However, the way it looked at the three of them had not changed at all. It was still so greedy, as if it had already decided it could eat all three of them. Come. Odin stretched out his hand, and the spear he had thrown with all his strength earlier returned to his grasp. Roar! The dark dragon let out an enraged cry, then charged toward Jormungandr first. The dark dragon had originally thought its ancestor Nidhogg was still alive. But now, from Jormungandr's mouth, it had learned that its ancestor had long since passed away. This enormous contrast filled it with rage. It could no longer control that anger. If you possessed Nidhogg's strength, I might respect you somewhat. Jormungandr clenched its fist and punched toward the dark dragon. The air carried a burning sensation, as if it had twisted. Ah! The dark dragon screamed and was instantly sent flying backward. Even against a true member of the Celestials, the current me would not be afraid. The dark dragon, a direct descendant of the dragon god Nidhogg, was like a babbling infant in Jormungandr's hands. Die! At that moment, the spear in Odin's hand carried a cold gleam as it shot straight toward Jormungandr's head. How many hundreds of thousands of years has it been? Seeing Odin's attack, a hint of admiration appeared in Jormungandr's eyes. I didn't expect another figure like you to appear in the Nine Realms. Swish! Jormungandr shifted sideways, and Odin's spear struck empty air. At that moment, Wells attacked from the side. Jormungandr paused slightly, and for the first time, a ripple appeared on that neither male nor female face that showed no clear gender. Thud! Wells punched Jormungandr's body, but Jormungandr's body was like a block of steel. After the punch landed, Wells's fist inexplicably began to ache. Screech! The next second, Jormungandr's body slid several zhang backward with a piercing sound. Once its body stopped, Jormungandr rubbed its chest and said softly, "Tens of thousands of years ago, the Celestials sent me an order, stop the unification of the Nine Realms." So that's how it was. Hearing Jormungandr's words, a matter that had confused Wells for a very long time finally had an answer. Back then, the Four-Realm Alliance had been the final large-scale battle of the Nine Realms. At the same time, it had also been Asgard's decisive war. Through that battle, Asgard became the absolute overlord. At that time, Wells and Odin had both calculated that the Celestials would interfere in that war. Because of that, Wells had even invited Bor, who had already retired, and the Dark Dragon, who had been cultivating under the Tree of Life. Yet for some unknown reason, the Celestials had not appeared in that war. So it turned out that it was not that the Celestials had never appeared. Rather, the Celestials had once ordered Jormungandr to stop the unification of the Nine Realms. But Jormungandr happened to be rebellious and had violated the Celestials' order. Wells said faintly, "Then should we thank you?" If Jormungandr had appeared on the battlefield of Nidavellir back then, Wells simply did not dare imagine the scene of it slaughtering everything. Tens of thousands of years ago, who could have been a match for this ancient beast? If they had used human wave tactics, the corpses of Asgard's army would probably have filled all of Nidavellir. "No need to thank me," Jormungandr said without joy or sorrow. "Death was actually destined long ago. I merely pitied the suffering of all beings, so I allowed you to live a few more years. Oh, spare me." At some point, the dark dragon had flown back with its wings spread. It mocked Jormungandr. "The dragon god Nidhogg chose to die heroically in battle, while you were transformed into a monster that is neither human nor beast, neither male nor female. You are still an ancient beast, after all, with a mighty name throughout this universe. Don't you feel ashamed?" The dark dragon had just been sent flying by Jormungandr in one move, and its right wing was a bloody mess. Yet when it spoke now, it still had one line after another ready, showing no hint of defeat at all. "If you know how to talk, then talk more." Wells could not help glancing at the dark dragon a few more times, while silently and calmly increasing the distance between himself and it. It really isn't easy for this weirdo to live until now. Can't this guy see the current situation is unfavorable to us? Wells's gaze toward the dark dragon became stranger and stranger. Courting death. Jormungandr finally grew furious. Its body flashed and appeared behind the dark dragon. Its hands were like two sharp pairs of scissors, stabbing toward the dark dragon's head. Not good. Odin and Leon attacked Jormungandr again with all their strength from the left and right. Although the dark dragon's strength was far inferior to Wells's and Odin's, the giant dragon had shouldered most of Jormungandr's attacks. If it died, the situation for the two Wells brothers would only become more passive. Bang! The auras of several people clashed against each other in the valley. Spatial cracks continued expanding, and as their battle continued, the valley slowly turned into flat ground. Wells. Odin's spear pierced into Jormungandr's abdomen. Just as he continued pushing forward, Jormungandr had already gripped Odin's spear with both hands. Coming. Wells arrived behind Jormungandr. His right palm transformed into a silver handblade and chopped straight toward Jormungandr's head. Infinity Stone? Sensing Wells's power, Jormungandr's voice carried some surprise. But with only one, you still can't kill me. Jormungandr's shoulder sank slightly, and Wells's handblade missed once again. At the critical moment, Jormungandr stretched out its right foot and kicked toward Wells. Wells narrowed his eyes, and his body retreated back to his original position like a nimble bird. Who said we only have one stone? Odin looked at Jormungandr with a smile and said, I have two more here, the Space Stone and the Time Stone. Hearing Odin's words, Jormungandr's heart tightened. Humph. Seeing a trace of panic on Jormungandr's face, Odin used all his strength and pushed the spear deeper into Jormungandr's body. Ah! Jormungandr screamed, its face gradually twisting. Die! Wells held the Reality Stone in his right hand and directly punched through Jormungandr's abdomen. I'll drag you all down with me. Jormungandr tightly grabbed Odin's hand, and the power in its body instantly became violent. Not good. He's going to destroy himself. Seeing this, Wells's expression changed. Royal brother, get away quickly. In truth, even without Wells speaking, Odin had already sensed that something was wrong. However, Jormungandr clung to him like a magnet, making him unable to move. Odin hurriedly said, Who turned you into the state? It was the Celestials. Don't you hate them to the bone? And I am now the enemy of the Celestials. If you drag me to death with you now, you will only let the Celestials gain a great advantage for nothing. You! Hearing Odin's words, Jormungandr froze in place. The next second, its eyes became softer and softer. Yes. My enemies are the Celestials. They were the ones who turned me into this ghostly appearance. Jormungandr suddenly pushed Odin away. Then, with a thud, its body turned into endless ash. Cough, cough. Although Jormungandr had pushed him away, Odin had still been at the center of the explosion and was affected by it. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground. Jormungandr's voice lingered in the air. You must be careful of the Celestials. The 9 realms alone are not their match. All right. Odin stood up and said with a solemn expression, Your hatred, I will repay it to the Celestials many times over. Odin knew that Jormungandr could have heavily injured him just now, or even dragged him to death. But at the final moment, Jormungandr had let him go. In the end, all of this was because Jormungandr held hatred toward the Celestials carved deep into its bones. I hope you can defeat the Celestials. Jormungandr's voice grew fainter and fainter. Part 3 and subscribe for more videos and don't forget to explore more playlist and comment your favorite part.